just coming in as I've announced them. Welcome, St Dominic's Sixth Form College. And just to say a few words about the Assembly's latest publications. Last week, the Economy Committee published Short Change, looking at the financial health of Londoners. It made recommendations including calling for young people to be given a bank account automatically. On Tuesday, the Budget and Performance Committee published its response to the Mayor's draft consultation budget 2018-19. The report evaluates the challenges across policing, transport, housing, fire, regeneration and more. And this afternoon, members are invited to the launch of the Police and Crime Committee's report on antisocial behaviour. It looks like it's going to be a full house, so get there early. And then, sadly, it is with regret that I advise the Assembly of the death on 30th December 2017 of former Greater London Council member Joan Wykes, MBE. She represented Chislehurst between 1973 and 1986. Can we please place on record the Assembly's condolences to her family? Great. And then on a happier note, I'm sure the Assembly would like to join me in congratulating all Londoners who were awarded honours in the New Year's Honours List, including the following recipient within the GLA family. A big shout out for Metropolitan Police Service Deputy Commissioner Craig Mackey. He was knighted for his services to policing. And can I just say, in the years that I've been with members, it seems to me he's the most appreciated Assistant Deputy Commissioner that the Assembly has worked with. We also congratulate Dr. Anne Rainsbury, NHS England Regional Director for London, and the Mayor's Health Advisor, and she was awarded CBE for services to healthcare. We congratulate Jackie Adams Benito, awarded MBE for services to fire and rescue services and to diversity. Michael Barrett for his services to transport. Dr. David Prowse for his services to transport. David Sims, Acting Deputy Inspector, Metropolitan Police, awarded OBE for services to national security and counter-terrorism. So they're going to have a good day at the Palace. Okay, it's a lovely day. Okay, let's go to declarations of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Noted. Can I ask the Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interest where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Thank you. And then item 3, minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held on 14th December 2017 and the plenary meeting held on 21st December 2017 as accurate records? Thank you. And then item 4, the Mayor's report. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 1st December 2017 to 4th January 2018? The Mayor will now provide us with an update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy New Year to you,
Happy New
Chair,
Year
and
to you.
everyone else here as well. For the first time since modern records began, London is entering the third week of January without having breached legal limits for toxic nitrogen dioxide air pollution. At long last, we're seeing some improvements in our toxic air, but much more needs to be done before Londoners can finally breathe a proper sigh of relief. Despite objections from some members of the Assembly, I've made it my priority to safeguard Londoners' health by targeting the capital's most polluted areas, and I'm taking bold action to transform London's air. We've introduced the T-charge and are bringing forward the ultra-low emission zone, ensuring TfL has the funding it needs for its creation and expansion. But I can't stop this health crisis without more help. Londoners deserve a government that wakes up to the scale of this problem and delivers tough new air quality legislation and resources so that legal limits are met all year round. Today, I've awarded £1.1 million to community projects across the capital to help them improve and create new local green spaces, including a community garden following the tragic fire at Grenfell Tower. Whether it's designing a new garden, planting trees, or greening school playgrounds, these projects will transform local spaces, improve health and well-being, and help clean up our toxic air. As part of our comprehensive plan to tackle knife crime, I've announced a further £1.4 million investment to fund more specialist youth workers in hospital A&Es. Youth support in major trauma centres has already made a difference to hundreds of young Londoners, helping them choose a different path away from violence. By expanding this work into A&Es, we can reach even more, offering them help when they most desperately need it. I'm doing everything I can to tackle this scourge in our city, and I announced additional funding to our police yesterday, but we all have a responsibility to give our young people the best chance in life. The government must stop shirking the responsibility and urgently deliver the funding necessary for the police to keep young Londoners safe and to tackle the root causes of violent crime if we're to bring to an end the tragic deaths we see on our streets. Finally, the independent expert analysis I commissioned revealed the potential economic risks and human costs at stake in the Brexit negotiations. This analysis shows why the government should now change its approach and negotiate a deal that enables us to remain in both the single market and the customs union. I've also been asked, Chair, for two oral updates. The first from UKIP.
From Assembly Member Curtin.
From Assembly Member Curtin. Many Brits love both America and Americans, as I do. My first trade visit was to the USA. We're working with American businesses and cities to encourage even better trade partnerships between the Brits and Americans. I want to thank the US businesses, innovators and investors who help contribute to London's success. We also thank American students, tourists, visitors and others who love London and our country. Many Brits will see the raft of comments about London made by President Trump as hardly in tune with the special relationship between our two countries. The US has also made clear their first priority in Brexit negotiations is to secure a trade deal with the EU. The UK is simply not able to enter into new trade deals with other countries until we've left the EU. Therefore, the UK government's focus should be on getting a good deal from the Brexit negotiations. 43% of UK exports in goods and services are to the EU, making it our largest trading partner by far. The best way to protect this trade, along with the jobs and investment that it creates, is by negotiating a Brexit that keeps the UK in the single market and customs union. And the second request for an oral update is about Carillion from Senator Member Dismal.
Yes, thank you.
The collapse of Carillion is a worrying time for the thousands of staff and subcontractors affected, as well as those who receive services they provide. My team have been in contact with the organisations that make up the Greater London Authority family regarding the collapse at Carillion. We've been assured that plans are in place to ensure any services that involve Carillion are maintained and will continue to monitor the situation. It's a key priority of mine to work with TFL and trade unions over the coming days to do what I can to protect jobs and livelihoods. I'm clear that these services must be maintained and will do what I can to protect the jobs and livelihoods of staff providing essential services to Londoners.
Okay, Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your answer, Mr. Mayor. And I asked you about the relationship we have with America and President Trump, and your comments that you've made about President Trump when he decided not to visit the United Kingdom last week. Some people have concerns that your comments and the comments of others could possibly be detrimental to a future relationship between this country and the United States. Now, as Mayor of London, your responsibility is to look after the transport network and to look after police and crime and make sure we have lower crime in the city. Do you think that some of your comments are detrimental to a possible future relationship between us? And you did mention you say you love America and Americans. you realise 60 million American people voted for President Trump. So your comments are alienating perhaps half of the American people.
One of my friends was murdered by a man who shouted the words "Britain first" when he shot and stabbed her.
Mr. Mayor, what's that got to do with President Trump?
I don't apologise for calling out a president who retweets what the leaders of Britain First are doing, thereby amplifying racist tweets from a racist organisation. Twitter has now banned this woman from Twitter. I'm appalled that a member of a political party standing in the Assembly doesn't call out somebody amplifying messages from a racist. I will not apologise for calling that out. I think President Trump was wrong to retweet not once, not twice, but 3 times the tweet of a racist, of a vile, of a fascist group.
Well, Mr. Mayor, one of the things that you did call President Trump out on is you said you didn't agree with the travel bans that he introduced soon after he became president. And now, recently you went to Pakistan to visit that nation. Now, Pakistan has a travel ban on Israeli citizens from visiting the country. You condemned President Trump for his travel bans. Do you condemn travel bans on Israeli citizens?
Absolutely. And when we had a reception here for High Commissioners and Ambassadors last year in City Hall, I was critical of those countries that have a travel ban.
Why did you welcome ambassadors from countries with a travel ban to City Hall and spend taxpayers' money on wining and dining them, but you're also you're not welcoming President Trump to the United Kingdom? Isn't there a difference of your actions?
This is a good example of the hypocrisy of politicians. On the one hand, your question is based on the pretext of trying to have better trade links with businesses and countries around the world. On the other hand, you're criticising the Mayor for showing hospitality to High Commissioners and Ambassadors from around the world. Which one is it?
Well, I'm asking you, Mr. Mayor. This is Mayor's question time. Okay, well, I will end my questioning here because I'm out of time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Curtin.
The word is out of order and out of time.
No, I've got you. I'll come to you. Assemblymember Devonish.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Hi.
I'd hoped for an oral update, and it may not have got through to your system, on a letter that my council leader, Councillor Nikki Aitken, sent to you on 10th of January to do with a borough-police merger. All I'd ask this morning, sir, is that you read the letter and please reflect on it. Westminster, I know everybody makes special pleas, but Westminster is a very special place, and we are very concerned about the proposed borough merger with 3 boroughs rather than Westminster. If you could please read the letter and respond, I'd be very grateful.
Noted.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity that Mr. Devonish has used, and so can you just give a quick yes or no?
Yeah, no, big punch. Noted. I'll follow that up.
Okay. Assemblymember Leone, on the update.
Yes, the update. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for your answer to Assemblymember Curtin. As you know, the American Embassy has been constructed in my constituency. Would you be surprised to hear that many of my constituents have welcomed your remarks and are very pleased at the stance that you've taken about President Trump and his visit?
Noted, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Assemblymember Boff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the reception last year, which you cited, you said you were critical of countries that had travel bans. It was reported that actually what you were critical of was one particular country who were going to have a travel ban, who had intended to have a travel ban. And you said that in the presence, i.e. the US, who have their regrettable travel ban against certain Muslim countries. But you said that in the presence of representatives from Bangladesh, Brunei, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Pakistan, Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. And all those countries have travel bans against Israeli citizens. Yeah. Were your comments transcripted? Did you criticise all countries who had travel bans, or were your criticisms just for the United States of America?
I think I've answered this question, Chair, but I'll repeat it. I expressed my concern about countries having travel bans to Israel as well, Israeli citizens as well.
At that meeting?
Yeah, at that time.
You have a transcript of your contribution?
I'm not sure. I can't remember what I said. I make many speeches that you'll appreciate, but I'm sure...
You can't remember what you said, but you're sure you said that, yeah?
Sorry?
You can't remember what you said, but you're sure you said that.
I am sure that I was critical of those countries who have a travel ban of Israeli citizens.
At
around that time.
event. At that event.
At around that time.
When you had the opportunity of all those countries sitting in front of you listening to your speech, you were courageous enough to criticise those countries for their travel bans. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, my comments known around that time, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say at the Mayor?
I made my comments known at around that time.
At around that time, not at that meeting, which you were then saying, earlier you were saying you made those comments at that meeting. It wasn't at that meeting.
One of the problems, Chair, when people don't listen to my answers is I have to repeat my answers. So
Yes.
I'm not clear what I say every speech I deliver. As you'll appreciate, Chair,
Sure.
as a full-time Mayor, I deliver many speeches on many days. What I am sure
Very
of
good.
is that around that time I was critical of those countries who have travel bans on Israeli citizens.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions for the update? No. Okay, then let's go on to item 5, questions to the Mayor, as set out on the priority order. Please note that question 2018-0155, entitled Heating in Barking Riverside Flats, has been withdrawn. The first question on the priority order paper is question 2018-0171, entitled Knife Crime in the Name of Assembly Member Bailey.
Every life lost to violence is a tragedy, especially when it is the life of a young person. Every single death is one too many. We've seen a worrying rise in this violence across England and Wales. Sadly, the tragic events in London on New Year's Eve were not isolated. The first week of January also saw horrific knife attacks in Bristol, Sheffield, Oxford and Birmingham. Unfortunately, this is not new. Between 2014 and 2015, knife crime in London rose by 5%. In 2016, knife crime across England and Wales rose by 14% and by 11% in London. I'm determined to keep doing everything in my power to rise to the challenge of tackling knife crime in London. The Met's targeted operation to prevent knife crime, Operation Sceptre, ran throughout last year with monthly operations. This operation uses a range of tactics such as weapon sweeps, intelligence-led hotspot patrols, test purchases and proactive operations to target repeat knife crime offenders. While between November and December, the Met ran Operation Winter Nights with tough measures to tackle violent crime. It made more than 900 arrests and took more than 350 weapons off London streets, including 278 knives and 20 firearms. The Met Commissioner, Sadiq, and I agree that the Met must continue to step up its fight against violent crime. The increased police operations means you should expect to see an increase in targeted, intelligence-led stop and search. Last year saw the biggest rollout of body-worn video anywhere in the world, here in London. This is a game changer for police accountability and should give confidence that stop and search is being used proportionately. But police will never be able to tackle crime on their own. That's why my knife crime strategy makes sure we use all the powers available at City Hall, along with our partners and communities, to tackle this hugely complex and damaging issue. The strategy, drawn up after consultation with community groups, experts, families, the police and other key partners, is made up of a wide range of both public health and criminal justice approaches, which are already underway. These include £1.4 million for services within health settings to support young victims of knife crime, extending the provision of youth workers in A&E departments to help steer those involved in knife crime away from violence, offering all schools a knife wand and a school safety officer, hosting an education summit and working with schools and anti-knife crime toolkits, an extra £625,000 for knife and gang crime projects, taking total spending to £7 million. I also launched the London Needs Your Life campaign in November, using influencers that resonate with young Londoners at risk of getting caught up in knife crime. We know that in order to solve the issues of knife crime, we need a range of measures. That's why I'm coupling a tough policing response with a range of health and criminal justice interventions to divert people away, and we're making a real difference on the streets of London. This includes work with mental health providers and young people involved in knife crime to address the root causes and strengthening and empowering communities to make a difference. At the same time, as a £1 billion cut to the Met Police budget, government cuts to council budgets have led to more than 30 youth centres closing since 2011, a real terms kind of £99 million for London schools in 2018-2019, and children's services facing a funding gap of at least £2 billion by 2020. I was able to announce yesterday an additional £49 million of funding to our police. £50 million of this will be used to boost police resources to help officers tackle knife crime. As a city chair, we're united in our quest to be tough on violent crime and its causes, but we need the government to step up as well.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. Any additional funds to combat knife crime in London are welcome, but why is it taking 18 months for you to act decisively on knife crime?
Well, it hasn't, Chair. The police have been acting for the last few years. The knife crime strategy we worked on was produced after consultation with experts, bereaved families, youth workers and others in the field. Would have been criticised, I can assure you, how do you produce the knife crime strategy without consulting experts. We have consulted experts, and I think the knife crime strategy is a comprehensive plan how we address the increase in knife crime.
After 6 months, do you believe the knife crime strategy has worked?
It's making a big difference, absolutely, in the context of the other cuts we've talked about, but some of the things we're doing in the knife crime strategy is starting to make a difference.
Do you think your knife crime strategy is focusing on things that will stem the flow right now, because you've had a very significant bump under your mayoralship, and will address the long-term trend of grain?
By itself, no. The knife crime strategy by itself will not solve the issue of knife crime. We need a joined-up approach from the government, from councils, from the police, from those public sectors whose support we need. We need, obviously, to have an enforcement strategy, and the police are working incredibly hard, notwithstanding the huge cuts they're facing, but also a prevent and a health strategy to prevent young people carrying a knife in the first place. Look, the police can address and stop those carrying knives. We want to stop young people carrying knives in the first place, and that means a comprehensive approach.
I agree. Just as of course, you in 2013 there's 29,700 odd police officers. You have 30,000 police officers, just over, and we still seem to have no effect on knife crime. Under your watch, what differently is being done by police now, bearing in mind you have more officers than they did then, and they had less knife crime offences?
Well, let me deal with this misinformation. So I've looked at what's worked in the past and what's worked around the world. So I've looked at what happened in 2008, 9, 10 in London. We had a government that was supportive. We had more than £1 billion more money in the Met Police Service, more police officers, more community support officers. We had a government invested in the Tackling Gangs Action Programme, £1.5 million given by the previous government to fund national programmes aimed at reducing youth violence, particularly gang-related offences. The previous government pulled together a central multidisciplinary team of practitioners, high visibility police in the nighttime economy. They gave additional funding to British Transport Police for search arches. They established a mediation and transformation service in London. They helped pay for the mentoring on short-term accommodation for young people managed under MAPA. And they funded targeted civil injunctions. That was just in 2008. In 2009 and 10, the previous government... I'm sorry. The insinuation is we aren't doing enough. The point I'm making is, if we had half the support given by the previous government, we'd do a lot better.
Mayor Khan, let me make this quite clear to you. This is not an attack. We've had 85 young people die. I'm trying to help you understand that there's many people, like myself, who've been youth workers for years, who don't see a cohesive approach.
Well,
that's why I'm saying this. So I'm asking you this question. I'm asking you a clear question. What will be different under your approach to what went before to stem the flow? We look at your knife crime strategy, and I don't see a cohesive approach.
That's a speech followed by a question, but I'll wait for the speech to end, Chair.
Just answer the question, mate. It's fine. Yeah, what's going to be different? There's a question. What is going to be different?
I was unclear whether Gareth was heckling you or heckling me.
He was heckling me. So, okay, right. you can relax.
So the big difference we have this time, Chair, is a government that doesn't seem to be taking action to stem the flow, to use the words used by Assemblyman Bailey that we're talking about. So I've given you just some examples of the help the government was given the previous May in 2008. In 2009-10, the previous government had a Tackling Knives Action Programme and a serious youth violence action programme. And local authorities had the funding to do stuff like Hackney. So Hackney, because of more funding, were able to, in 2009-10, the police and the council started working on developing a multi-agency gangs unit similar gangs diversion work being undertaken. Now, the cuts local authorities are facing, the cuts we're facing because of the government, the cuts faced by youth services has an impact. I know it's not comfortable for Conservative politicians, but it's my job as the Mayor to let Londoners know the challenges we face.
Mayor Khan, we're talking about your responsibilities. Your predecessor was able to work with governments and make this happen. You have a responsibility to do this. And let's look at your knife crime strategy. You talk about intelligence-led stop and search. What will be different? How long have you been doing this intelligence-led strategy? It's been ineffective up till now. Your tactics have been ineffective. You have more officers. What will be materially different for Londoners going ahead to protect their safety?
So the problem is the Assembly member gives the impression of rising above party politics, but he's playing party politics. Let me give you an example, just one. Let me give you one example. Let me give you one example of the hypocrisy in the question. So the Assembly member is criticising intelligence-led stop and search.
You know, I haven't criticised intelligence-led stop. I've asked you what is different. I'm asking you about your responsibilities, not the government's.
Chair, this is a separate question.
Doing?
The question was based on a premise of criticism of intelligence-led stop and search.
I may not. I haven't got there. I asked you what would be different using your system of intelligence-led stop and search as opposed to the one you were using beforehand.
No, we don't want this table tennis. What is happening here is that the Assembly member has simply asked you what is different now in relation to your strategy, and that's the answer he's seeking. Both of you seem to be going off on this one. It seems to be a very simple question.
I'm sorry, Deputy Chair, if you didn't hear my previous answer, but one, which was this. I've published a comprehensive knife action plan after consulting with Londoners and experts and bereaved families and the police and those at the coalface. And one of the things I'm trying to explain to the Assembly member is that the plan is being executed in the context of massive cuts unprecedented in the Met Police Service, massive cuts unprecedented with local authorities, and it's in the context of those cuts that we're doing all that we can to address the evil of knife crime.
But are you, so two things, you have more officers, that is a fact. I'm asking you, let me give you, only 15...
It's not a fact, but heaven forbid we have facts at Assembly when asked by Tory members.
Let's talk about your approach then. So, only 15% of stop and searches are about knife crime. Are you looking to change that? 60% of stop and searches are about drug offences. Which one do we have a problem with in London here today? Which is the pressing priority for you?
Well, I think now we're in danger of the Assembly member suggesting the police stop without reasonable suspicion. That'd be wrong.
No, I didn't say anything at all.
The police will stop and search somebody if there is reasonable suspicion that somebody's committed a crime or is about to commit a crime. It is a fact that the biggest reason police officers have for stop and search is because they suspect somebody is carrying drugs or is involved in drug activity. Now, if somebody is saying we should return to such laws, I disagree with him. I don't want to see police officers swapping communities without reasonable suspicion.
Excuse me, I said nothing of the kind. Do not try to put words in my mouth. I am asking you, what are you going to do with your stop and search strategy, which you announced extra stop and search around knife crime? What is going to be different? Are you going to ask the police to do more stops and search around knife crime?
Well, as I explained in my first answer to the question, there's going to be increased police activity. And some of the money I've announced this week, £15 million of the £49 million, will support some of the increased police activity. A number of things the police will be doing, including weapon sweeps. I'll go back to my answer because clearly some of them didn't hear it. They'll include weapon sweeps carried out by the police, really important. They'll include test purchases. Let me ask the question. No, let me ask the question. Let me ask the question. You've interrupted me. Let me ask the question. They will include a range of tactics, Chair. Weapon sweeps, intelligence-led hotspot patrols, test purchases, and practical operations to target repeat knife crime offenders. Stop and search target-led is one of the approaches used by the police. Because there are increased operations, you can assume there'll be increased target-led stop and search.
Mr. Mayor, can you guarantee young black men in London will not be targeted excessively by the police?
The police will target no knife offenders. The police will target those communities where there is high knife crime. 6 out of 10 victims of knife crime deaths are young black, Asian, minority, ethnic Londoners. And what these communities are saying to me and to the Commissioner is we want an increased police presence in our communities. We want our youngsters to be safe. We want those people carrying knives to have those knives taken away from them. So the police response will be very simple. It'll be real intelligence, it'll be geographically focused, and it'll be performed professionally, with the outcome of police targeting and arresting offenders, weapons taken off our streets, and stopping these attacks happening. And I'm sorry you don't agree with that approach.
I'm asking you for a guarantee that young black men will not be excessively targeted by stop and search. They were 6 times more likely to be stopped, and that's risen to 8 times more likely under your watch. Are you going to do something about that?
Let me give you an example, Chair, of where the Assembly member is having selective amnesia. The former Special Advisor to David Cameron has said in an article titled "Bailey argues for yes to changing rules to increase stop and search." The real issue about stop and search is training the police to do it better and ensure they stop the right people. A lot of politicians and campaigners complain about stop and search, but I think the public has a different view because of the amount of knife crime. We're following the advice given by the Special Advisor to David Cameron in a previous life. I'm sorry he's changed his views.
No, you're not, Mayor, because I absolutely asked you, are you going to guarantee young black Londoners they will not be targeted? Under your current system, that seems to be the case. That article argues my point.
Well, the big difference.
No.
See, the big difference.
Yes,
you see, the big difference. The big difference between the policy articulated by the Special Advisor to David Cameron and me is we have body-worn videos. Body-worn videos is the game changer, because body-worn videos gives confidence to the police and to the public about police accountability. So whereas in the past, some people were advocates of industrial-scale mass stop and search, I'm saying target-led, intelligence-based with the body-worn video.
Mr. Mayor, I pointed out to you that your target-led system has increased the amount of times that young black people are stopped with no real serious increase in detections or convictions. So I put it to you that it's your system that's failing, not mine. I've asked you the question 4 times and you've not answered. Do you want me to ask you one more time to give you an opportunity to actually answer the question? Can you guarantee young black Londoners they will not be inadvertently, excessively targeted under your new extra stop and search?
I want to reassure Londoners that there will be increased police activity to target knife crime and those carrying.
So you're not going to answer the question?
I don't think we're making any progress on this one.
It's a ridiculous question.
Are you going to have a different question?
I take that as a no, Mayor. Many of us are worried. Many of us are worried that your stop and search, the extra. Mayor, I want to ask you another question.
Chair, we can't have a situation where the Assembly member answers his own question.
No, but he says you're not answering his question.
It's for me. Well, the job of the chair is to be impartial. My job is to answer the question.
I'm telling you what is happening. He says you're not answering his question.
As things currently stand, I'm the mayor, not you. It's for me to answer the questions how I want to answer them. And what I'm saying is this: the public will see increased police activity in areas of high knife crime.
Mr. Mayor, can we move on?
By the Tories, because it's their cuts leading to the police doing their job.
Mr. Mayor, can we move on?
They may not like it.
All right, that will do.
Mr. Mayor, can we move on? I have one more. Can you give us some details on what you intend to do this extra money around stop and search? I'm sorry, not remove stop and search, we're not getting along on that, around targeting knife crime in London. You've pledged to make some money, which is very welcome. Can you give us some details on what that looks like pertaining to knife crime?
So yesterday I was able to announce £49 million of additional police resources. Some of it will go towards filling the pay rise, which the Home Secretary authorised for the police, but
Mr. Mayor, that's not about knife crime.
Part of the funding I gave yesterday was in relation to £50 million for police operations. Last year we saw a number of operations from the police operations sector, Operation Venice, and another operations. So the additional money I've given to the police will lead to more operations from the police. I'm sorry if the Assembly member thinks the only tool in the toolkit is stop and search. It shows a lack of understanding of the amazing work the police do. I've tried to explain, despite interruptions, some examples of the work the police do, from weapon sweeps to targeting known knife offenders,
Mr. Mayor,
and includes target intelligence stop and search.
Time is pressing. You've been over that before to re-announce things. I want to know that. Do you have a cohesive strategy? When did you plan to put this extra money in? Why did you wait so long?
because the budget process takes place once a year, Chair. What happens once a year is we set our budgets. The police statement took place before Christmas, shortly before recess, 1 day before the draft budget was made. It beggars belief that the Tory police minister doesn't realise when we set our budget. So the police minister set his budget 1 day before our draft budget. During the course of Christmas, my office has worked incredibly hard to see what that would mean for the police budget and for the rest of the GLA budget. I'm able to announce this week, in advance of the hearing next week, what we're able to do in relation to the police. And that includes the pay lift for the police,
Mr. Mayor,
and other issues as well.
You sat in front of a budget committee yourself for over 3 hours and never mentioned this extra money once on knife crime.
I was there and you weren't. Let me tell you what I did say. I said to the Budget and Performance Committee that the officers are looking at the calculations to see what we can do with the additional monies I'm going to raise from council tax, £12 on the police precept, and the increase of 2.99% on non-police precept to be used to help the fire service and the police. Look, the basic rule, do your homework before you ask the questions.
I'm doing your homework. You're not answering questions. Abusing me
doesn't
make you right. Abusing me doesn't save Londoners.
Listen,
it doesn't. It doesn't. This is actually about life and death. So you waving your hands.
Now we get the sanctimoniousness from this politician.
Chair, I'll leave it there.
Right. Assembly Member Desai.
Mr. Mayor, firstly, thank you very much for your very comprehensive answers and also what you told us in your opening statement. I want to ask you 3 specific questions, and my time is limited, so if I could ask you to be as brief as possible. You already talked about a public health-led approach, and there's some innovative thinking here. Could you put some flash on it and give Londoners a vision of what this actually means in practice?
So what it means is not putting all our eggs in the enforcement basket. For example, mental health has a role to play. Health workers have a role to play, doing work in pupil referral units, doing work with youth workers, doing work with gang diversion. A number of young people have issues that can be dealt with at the prevent an earlier stage to stop them carrying the knife in the first place. That's what we're trying to do.
Right. Secondly, Detective Chief Superintendent Yates, police Met's work in this area, he has talked about the social media and the role that it has played in the upsurge in knife crime-related incidents. I know you talked about this in the past, but can you tell us what you actually intend to do in this area, very specifically in 2018? So
one of the advantages we have about the police service now is some of the most senior officers, from Martin Hewitt to the Commissioner Crestic, were around during 2008, 9 and 10. And what they've noticed is it's a very different situation now with social media. The glorification of knife crime, the incitement of knife crime, the sort of turf war that takes place. That's a new challenge they've not seen before. But also the horrific nature of some of the knife crimes taking place now is very different from before. We're talking to social media companies, we're talking to internet service providers. The police have good contacts with them. Sometimes we're successful, other times we're not, in relation to taking down things that can provoke a response which leads ultimately to knives being used.
And finally, the Borough Command of Newham area that I represent in this space, and I think other Assembly members will talk about their own experiences later on. He has called on communities to join together to tackle this crime, saying, and I quote, "There are real gains to be had by saying this is what we've done, now over to you, what do you think we should be doing and where are the gaps?" I personally think this is a very brave and courageous statement. So yes, I mean, we talked about what the Met can do, what you are doing in great detail. And we need communities to pull together too. My question to you is, how can we be sure, how can we ensure that the community can identify those gaps and fit them into the police in all London boroughs? What is your vision of police-community partnership in these difficult times?
One of the things that we've done is each borough now has a knife crime plan, and they'll be different according to borough. And I really welcome what your borough commander is doing, taking on board the views from the community, but empowering them. The phrase I've used in the past is it takes a village to raise a child. It seems only when there's a Labour mayor to these guys when I say that all the solutions lie in the gift of the mayor. I realise, as good as some people think I am, I can't solve knife crime by myself, nor can the police solve it by themselves either. It's really important to have a teamwork approach.
Thank you for the answer. Can I just emphasise the role that parents and families of victims have got to play in this?
Assembly Member Arnold.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. Mr Mayor, can I just make a quick comment before I ask my question? And can I just feedback from a meeting of my IAG in Hackney, because you mentioned Hackney earlier, and I was there this week. And let me just say this. This IAG that I've been a member now for 17 years we have seen, we've seen some stuff in Hackney, and all of us round that table totally endorsed our borough commander's implementation of stop and search and activities under Operation Spectre, which included knife sweeps, which included identifying, working in the community, finding out the knife hotspots, and looking to target habitual knife offenders. I don't apologise for supporting that IAG. I am not going to be lectured by anybody about the importance of IAG, and I certainly would not sit here and ask a ridiculous question like, can you guarantee that no child and no young person is going to die from a knife crime? That is not where we should be. That's not the question. The question for me to you, Mr. Mayor, is, and I'm speaking knowing and have met families this year, families from both those who have lost their loved ones and those who are grieving because their loved ones are now serving numbers of years in jail. So it's usually two sides of the coin here. It's one fatality, one perpetrator, and the families and friends around those two individuals. And that is, for you, this is a guarantee that you can make, and that this issue is going to remain at the top of your agenda in terms of ensuring that we are going to be working with London councils and every partner to actually find different tools, different ways of bringing some understanding to our young people to say that a knife wound damages your organs, cuts your veins, cuts your arteries, and you die. And so find a way away from knife use.
I mean, Chair, first thank you for your comments. It's good to have sensible, responsible, well-informed comments from Assembly members on this area. One of the things that all this has in common is young lives being wasted. These are young lives being wasted, whether you carry a knife or whether you're a victim of a knife crime, and you'll be aware, as somebody who actually knows their community, of the overlap between those carrying knives and those who are victims of a knife. If you did a Venn diagram, there'd be an overlap, I'm afraid. And that's why it needs to have a holistic approach. And I went back to, they didn't like it, but the approach of central government in 2007, 8, 9, 10, helping local authorities, helping the police, helping communities try and grapple with this issue. It is very difficult, though, when local authorities have lost 40% of their budgets.
Absolutely.
It is very difficult when the police have lost more than £1 billion of their budget.
Absolutely.
It is very difficult when there are fewer community support officers. It is difficult when there's increased social media taking place with young people glorifying knife crime. These are complex issues. And I think a flippant approach to give a soundbite to be in the newspaper or to have 30 seconds on BBC ITV London News is not a responsible way to approach it. And I welcome the approach, Chair, if you forgive me for saying so, taken by the Chair of the Assembly and by sensible, well-informed members of the Assembly today.
Thank you.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Yes, thank you. I'll ask a discursive question, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I certainly welcome the measures, significant measures, any that are announced, of course, and I don't doubt your sincerity in addressing this critical issue. But how will this Assembly and the Police and Crime Committee and others be able to judge your effectiveness in addressing this issue in, say, 2 years' time?
Our effectiveness will be judged by knife crime going down. It's going up. Yeah. So crime from 2014, violent crime, knife crime has been going up across the country. It's not just a London issue. I gave you some examples of the horrific consequences of knife crime around the country, from Oxford to Birmingham to West Midlands to Sheffield. So let's not pretend this is just a London problem. It's a problem around the country and England and Wales. I'm hoping this government starts doing some of the stuff the previous government did. Notwithstanding that, what you'll see is increased police activity. You'll see increased number of sweeps taking place, increased number of interventions by the police, more youth activity, more youth workers in A&E taking place.
Sorry, I don't want to be rude to interrupt. We've heard in the previous answer a range of measures. I don't think we need to repeat that, and I don't really want to be referring it to those lovely towns and cities outside London. I'm talking about London, of which you are responsible for. So just briefly, if you couldn't try and help me on this one, because we do need a measure of effectiveness, and you know that I'll return to the subject of targets, but I'd like to know how we will be able to hold you to account you, Mr Mayor, it's your responsibility, and the Mets, in reducing this terrible issue?
Well, I've said we need to get to grips with knife crime. We're seeking to do that. The context, though, is knife crime didn't begin on May 2016. Even you, as a Conservative, must accept that. Knife crime started going up. The graphs show now from 2014. So just like you've got to accept, surely, that knife crime started going up before I became mayor. It's not going to go down instantly. We have new policies.
Mayor, you are, I'm sure, as an elected mayor, and as the Commissioner with a small c, holding to account the Met, you are here to take responsibility to keep Londoners safe. So you must be held to account for that. How will we judge you? Will it be a 5% reduction, 20% reduction, 50% reduction? How can we hold you to account, which is what everyone, not just Conservative colleagues, but other colleagues no doubt will want to do, hold you to account about addressing knife crime?
Well, we're trying to reduce it. Simple as that.
Just reducing? Okay.
Trying to reduce it. I'm not saying it'll be achieved in the time frames you're suggesting. It will take a lot of effort. It will take a lot of teamwork. It's very hard to do so.
I don't
we're
doubt
having
that.
the cuts we're facing, and local authorities having the cuts we're facing. We're seeing youth centres closed down. We're seeing the NHS with the cuts they're facing.
Let's not keep
CAMS with the cuts they're facing. It's very difficult.
Let's not keep deflecting. I just wanted to ask you about what you're going to do. I don't think I'll get any further, Chair. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. The next question on the agenda is from Assembly Member Whittle, and it relates to hate crime.
Thank you, Chair. The law is clear and the Met operates, as do other forces, under Home Office guidance. Any crime which is perceived by the victim or any other person to have been motivated by hatred based on someone's ethnicity, nationality, faith, disability, sexual orientation or gender identity must be recorded as such. Hate crimes can include offences committed against a person, which may include threats, physical assault, harassment and damage to property. They may also include offences which may not be directed at individual targets, such as incitement to violence or incitement to hatred. Where a victim, witness or police officer considers that any offence is motivated by hostility or prejudice based on the Home Office definition, that offence will be flagged as a hate crime, and this is then considered in how offences are investigated and prosecuted. What is equally or perhaps more important is that this flagging can help ensure that the victim is offered the most appropriate support. If there is sufficient evidence to prove this hostile or prejudiced motivation behind an offence, then it may also carry enhanced sentencing at court. For example, in Hackney, there was an incident of members of the Orthodox Jewish community having their cars vandalised. They were specifically targeted because of their faith, so this was recorded as criminal damage and flagged as a faith-hate offence. We know both anecdotally from our communities and statistically from reporting that hate crime is rising. That is why I've made a specific commitment to address this blight on our communities within the police and crime plan. We must also not lose sight of the fact that we're talking about criminal activity, whatever the motivation, with people who are victims. Victims of hate crime need to see that the crime is taken seriously and that it will be responded to by the police and the court.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Could you just explain, and thank you for that explanation, could you just explain, for example, in my question here is 58 hate crime drug offences, I think the majority of those are possession. How would that become a hate crime?
Let's say, for example, you were carrying a drug and you were arrested by a police officer who was an ethnic minority and you racially abused him or her. That could be a hate crime.
I see. I think the public have got the message that basically the police, the Met, if you like, are sort of deprioritising certain crimes. You know, it talks about robberies and burglaries and what have you. Does it mean that we're now in a situation that if there is a hate crime element to one of those otherwise low-level crimes, it will become a serious crime?
The police are always triaged when it comes to them investigating offences, and they'll carry on triaging. So if there's vulnerability, if there's a victim, if there's a serious crime, it'll probably take be more of a priority than if it's a crime without a victim, where there's less likelihood of somebody being caught and there's less vulnerability.
I see. So, for example, if you're, say, like there's a mugging in the street, your phone is taken, your wallet or something, but there is a hate crime element to it, something that would otherwise be probably ignored then does not become ignored, becomes a serious crime.
I'd be surprised if the police ignored a mugging. That's probably not a good example. A better example is if a shed was burnt down. So if a shed was burnt down in a garden and there's no victim, the police and the police response may be different to if there was a shed burnt down with some racist hatred activity. I suspect that's probably a better example, because with a mugging you expect the police to respond.
With on the general point of hate crime in this regard, you did mention there the definition very clearly from the Macpherson report, traditional one.
Or as we call it, the Home Office.
Right, yeah, but that's been one that we've all gone by. But last year it seems that the CPS and Alison Saunders seems to have expanded this. If I could just quote, the understanding now is that it would include a hate crime: ill will, spite, contempt, prejudice, unfriendliness, antagonism, resentment, and dislike. It would appear to me that therefore that original definition seems to have been somewhat expanded, or rather, could I ask you, is that what the Met are now using as a definition, the one that I've just read?
No.
They're not.
The Met are in charge of arresting and getting the evidence, and then in consultation with the CPS charging. It's for the CPS to prosecute, and the definition I gave you is the Home Office one that the Met Police are using.
So if the Met are using the traditional Macpherson, definition, what is your view on this announcement from the CPS? It does seem to rather confuse the issue. Where are we? Is it just a matter as well of expressing, as they say, dislike, which I think we'd all agree is a highly subjective thing?
I can't comment. I've not seen the CPS definition that you're reading out.
It was very heavily publicised last year, and I think what was interesting about it, Mr. Mayor, I don't know what your feeling is on this, perhaps you could tell me, is that it came out without any recourse, as it were, to Parliament or whatever. It seemed that suddenly the definition had suddenly expanded at a time where there is much talk about hate crime. So you're saying to me that that is to be disregarded. The Met do not use this. They use the Macpherson definition.
The definition I read out is the definition the Met use, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question in the name of Assembly Member Russell. Manifesto pledge on clean air.
Can I thank you for your continued hard work on this area, working with me. Improving London's dangerously polluted air is a major priority for me and you. Our ability to meet legal and safe limits is made harder because of government policy and inaction. I will achieve legal limits for nitrogen dioxide as quickly as possible and well before the government's target of 2025. I then want to go beyond these to achieve World Health Organization guidelines for the smallest dangerous particles, PM2.5, by 2030. The good news is that my plan to improve air quality is working. This year, London has not yet exceeded the hourly legal limit for nitrogen dioxide. This is the longest period in the last 18 years since modern records began that London's air has been legally compliant before incurring a breach. However, this is still a long way to go before Londoners consistently have the air quality they deserve. That's why I'm taking further ambitious action to clean our air. I've already introduced the T-charge. I've delivered the first 2 of 12 new low-emission bus zones, which have reduced bus emissions by over 80%, and I've begun retrofitting 5,000 older buses, and I've committed that from now on, no new pure diesel double-decker buses will join the TfL fleet. And from the 1st of January this year, no new diesel taxis have or will be licensed. But I want to go further and faster. I've confirmed that even stronger vehicle emission standards will apply when the Central London ULEZ commences 17 months earlier than planned in April 2019. I'm also consulting on expanding the ULEZ up to the North and South Circular roads from 2021 and introducing the ULEZ standards for heavy vehicles like buses, coaches and lorries London-wide from 2020. These measures will reduce nitrogen oxide road transport emissions by around 45% in central London by 2020 and around 30% in inner and outer London by 2021. Approximately 100,000 people will no longer live in areas exceeding legal limits, which is a reduction of nearly 80% in 2021. But legal limits could be met much faster if government gave us the support we so desperately need. In particular, the government should commit to delivering a national scrappage fund to help get the most polluting vehicles off our roads and give us the powers and resources to address non-transport sources of NOx. You'll be aware the non-transport sources are responsible for nearly half of NOx emissions in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm really glad that you are currently asking Londoners for their views on how big the ultra-low emission zone should be and when it should come in. I've heard from many outer Londoners that they want the inner London ULEZ standards to apply where they live, so that's beyond the North and South Circular. The British Lung Foundation cares about this too. They've sent me some new data that shows some of the boroughs with the highest rates of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, are in outer London, outside the proposed inner London ULEZ. Their data's really stark. If you live in Havering, you're 85% more likely to have COPD compared to the London average. And in Barking and Dagenham, it's 71%. So this is an outer London health crisis that they've exposed. Now, as you know, my report, Left Out Londoners, called for a London-wide ULEZ for all dirty vehicles. Now, if everyone in outer London asks you for this in your consultation, will you do it?
So I'll look at the evidence. I mean, the consultation is very important, and the evidence, any evidence you send is always useful, Caroline. Can I just tell you, so it's a genuine consultation, but can I just tell you the stat I've got, which may help the discussion, is, because I've considered expanding it London-wide, is there are apparently a small number, around 1% of outer London roads, where they're expected to exceed legal limits in 2025. That's 1%. And the advice I've received is it'd be far quicker to bring them within limits by targeted local measures than a blanket London-wide ULEZ. But my mind's not closed. That's the advice I've received.
Okay,
targeted approaches may be more effective than the blanket. But please respond.
Okay, well let's look at all the evidence as things go forward. People living on the north and south circular boundary roads are telling me that they're really worried that these roads are going to become even more congested with people in cars and small vans avoiding the inner London ULEZ, making pollution worse for those people who are actually living along the route. Do you share their concerns?
Yeah, that's why we're taking time. So the criticism that people like you are making is why not do it quicker? There are many reasons why we can't. One of it is to get it right and get the consultation right. And we've got lessons from the past. When the congestion charge was first brought in, those roads just outside the sea charge area saw more congestion as people tried to avoid the sea charge. We're trying to learn from the past. Rules are consult properly going forward.
Glad you're learning from that. Now, you want the inner London ULEZ to start in 2021. And the thing is that you might not actually be mayor in 2021. So if your ULEZ consultation shows strong public support for bringing it in earlier, would you implement all the ULEZ phases within your current term of office?
No. The technology is not there. Whether we'll be the first city doing it, we've got to get the consultation right. We've got to make sure the commercial fleets have time. You've already identified one reason why we can't rush. Obviously, I can't tie the hands of my successor, so that's why I've got to win the election.
Okay, in your election manifesto, you promised, and I quote, to restore London's air quality to legal and safe levels. So do you agree that based on that manifesto promise, all Londoners would expect to breathe legal and safe air by the end of this term of office?
Only if the government supports me. The problem is the government's not supporting me. I've already said in my answer. I know you're trying to rush me because you've got more questions, but it's difficult for me to answer the question and be rushed by you for the next one. But you'll be aware that half, roughly speaking, of the NOx emissions comes from non-transport uses.
Yep.
I'm doing what I can with the half that I'm in control of, but it's just not possible for me to address issues outside of my control. That's why I'm saying there should be a new Clean Air Act for purpose for the 21st century.
And totally agree with you on all of that. The current government predictions, which take account of your clean air plans, suggest London won't be compliant with nitrogen dioxide limits until 2025. And what's worrying is that means you won't be able to deliver the manifesto promise during this term or possibly even the next one, and that's really 2 terms too late.
Well, that's a point to make to the government, I think, rather than to me. But I'm doing what I can lobbying the government. Sometimes these guys support me. They're against the ULEZ being brought forward. They're against the T-charge. I think they're probably against most of the measures I'm doing to try and clean up our air. So it's you, us and the Lib Dems trying to lobby this government to do the right thing by London.
Indeed. I'm out of time, so I'm going to pass.
Okay. No follow-up to that. So let's go to the next question, Mayor. And the question from Assembly Member Unmesh SI has been answered. So we'll now move to the question from Assembly Member Copley, rail fare increase.
Thank you for your question. Once again, the sky-high increase in rail fares has outstripped the increase in wages as the cost of living continues to rise. For years, commuters have had to put up with delays, cancellations and overcrowding due to the government's failed approach to national rail services. Rail operators are now adding insult to injury with the highest fares increase since 2013. Whether CPI or RPI, the government's approach still leaves fares at a level which is too high and unaffordable for many. A freeze would by far be the best alternative to the government's current rail fare policy. I've proved that it's possible to run an excellent, accessible public transport system which is invested in while keeping fares frozen. London's hard-pressed commuters who rely on national rail services want to know why the government won't follow my lead to keep fares affordable across the rail network. If I can do it, why can't the government and privatised rail companies? Before I was elected, TfL fares went up by more than 42% over 8 years. I've stopped this, and Londoners making 4 million journeys a day on TfL services aren't paying a penny more. By 2020, the average London household will have saved around £200 thanks to my fares freeze. My fares freeze has also helped cushion a drop in passenger numbers against falling ridership elsewhere on the network. London Overground, where fares have been frozen, is the only one of the 4 main train operators within London and the South East to see passenger numbers rise. It's vital that the government leaves behind its broken franchise model and devolves more commuter routes to TfL. If these commuter routes were run by TfL, Londoners would get the affordable, high-volume, high-frequency suburban metro services they deserve.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor, and I, of course, welcome your freeze. Were the government to freeze rail fares, though, in real terms, it would make a material difference whether or not they chose to use the RPI measure or the CPI measure. And my real question is whether or not we should have a full switchover from RPI to CPI, which would, of course, save an extra 1%. Do you think that would be the right approach?
I think the right approach is to freeze fares. And it can be done. You've seen recently a massive bailout given to Virgin and Stagecoach, which shows how the franchise system is failing. Why couldn't some of that money be used to give a fares freeze to hard-pressed commuters? Rather than bailing out privatised companies, I think we should be helping communities. As you've reminded me, the cost of living crisis means with housing costs going up, with food costs going up, with the cost of Brexit, even more important for the government to be inside of communities. I'm saying, look, I take your point about CPI being more passenger-friendly than RPI in relation to index-linked. I'm saying go even further and freeze fares.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. In light of rail fares increases, I'm sure Londoners would welcome further devolution of suburban train lines to London Overground. And you're aware that last summer the Gibb report recommended the transfer of the Great Northern Metro line, which goes through my constituency, and the East Croydon Milton Keynes line to TfL. But the government said it required further assessment. Is TfL involved in that assessment, and how hopeful are you that this year we can get some movement on devolution?
I think we've made progress with Chris Grayling on the parts of the Gibb report. I'm afraid no progress on the 3 suburban commuter trains. And I continue to make the case to him about us having great responsibility of the suburban services. As you said, Gibb said this in his report published last June. We've expressed willingness with DfT to progress these recommendations, and the good news is we expect to see progress later on this year. And I'm confident DfT will approach this with an open mind and will take our proposals seriously. And these are parts of the network where it's possible to make quicker progress, and TfL and I remain committed and keen to take these proposals forward. I understand the government's decision. I'm not happy about it, but I think working together we can get to a resolution where the Gibbs recommendations are carried through, which will lead to your constituents, my constituents, Londoners and others seeing a better service.
So you have seen a different approach in the DfT from previous years?
And I welcome the approach taken by Chris Grayling the last time we met and his officials. I'm optimistic about us making progress here, but also you'll know of the vexed issue of Crossrail 2 apparently being delayed. I'm confident that the independent review will be positive and make progress going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we go to the next question, which is now on winter pressures in the NHS from Assemblymember Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this question, Assemblymember Dr. Sahota. I agree this is a huge concern. Firstly, I want to put on record my thanks to our fantastic frontline NHS staff who work tirelessly all year round to ensure the NHS continues to deliver for its patients. This is traditionally the most challenging time of year for them, but the fact they continue to deliver despite the challenges demonstrates what a credit they are to our city. As you'll be aware, my responsibilities with regard to NHS services are limited, but in my leadership role as chair of the London Health Board, I regularly meet NHS leaders where we discuss the challenges they face. In particular, I met Professor Jane Cummins, the NHS Regional Director for London in November, where she briefed me on the comprehensive winter planning the NHS has done this year. You'll recall I had a flu jab back in September as part of this planning work, and we did some publicity at the time to encourage others in key groups to also get a flu jab. However, the issues we're seeing this winter were, as you quite rightly point out, clearly predicted by many informed organisations such as the King's Fund and the Royal Colleges. The report I commissioned from the King's Fund, which was published last September, pointed to the potential gap of £4.1 billion in NHS finances by 2021. The report said that where even if additional investment is made in services in the community, reductions in hospital use on the scale proposed are not credible. And I quote, heroic efforts will be needed simply to manage rising demand with existing hospital capacity. The problem we have is that when it comes to health in the NHS, this government has not listened to extensive calls from experts or indeed the NHS's own CEO, Simon Stevens, for increased funding. The simple fact is that this government has not funded the service in line with the changing health demographics and the growth in London's population. You've asked about extra winter funding. I understand that the extra winter money, which was not sufficient, has been put to good use. I know there were also concerns that it arrived too late, but the NHS has mobilised this money very quickly. All London acute mental health organisations received some additional funding to support urgent and emergency care delivery. However, we know it's not enough to meet growing demand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that answer. Of course, we do have a crisis. We have a 95% occupancy rate for hospital beds. 1 in 10 nurses are leaving the NHS. Last year, more nurses left the NHS than recruited into the NHS. We have ambulances waiting more than 30 minutes to drop off their patients. And we have patients lying in agony in A&E wards for up to 5 hours before they can get a bed or a trolley. And I think this Prime Minister has taken too much of a tutoring from the stable genius across the Atlantic Ocean, when she says the NHS is okay, there's no crisis in the NHS, that we were the most prepared for the NHS that we could have been. If this is preparation for the winter, right, I would now want to know what would be chaos like without this preparation. But the question I ask you, Mr. Mayor, do you think that there's a role for you working with the boroughs and lobbying the new Secretary of State for Health and Social Care to ensure that adult social services are provided adequately in London and make sure that the funding comes to the NHS and social services? Do you think there's a role for you to give the leadership, to bring the councils together and to lobby together?
Well, yes, but let me tell you why I say yes. We've been successful working with the government on the start of a devolution package, and the government deserves some credit for that in relation to devolution. But you'll be aware of the link between adult social care and the issues around NHS and healthcare. You'll also be aware of the 40% cut local authorities have faced in their budgets since 2010. Some local authorities, when you speak to them privately, worry in the next few years all they'll be able to do is the statutory minimum rather than additional services like youth services and the rest. So I'm more than happy to take up your recommendation to work with London councils to use the bully pit of City Hall with London councils to be an advocate for more support for adult social care. And by the way, the joined upness that we're seeing taking place unofficially can be done officially, removing the silos and using the monies we have more sensibly. So I'll take up your recommendation and think about how I can work with London councils to lobby the government for more support around adult social care.
And of course, the other thing is you obviously will be monitoring the impact of the STP and the report you had from King's Fund, right? I mean, you might want to know that the 2 hospitals in my constituency, Hillingdon and North West London, were the worst performing in the country because North West London was the ones which are being experimented with 5 closures of A&E department, of which 2 have already taken place. So we are already feeling the impact of these closures, and also further bed closures planned, right? So I hope that you will also make sure that the STP standards you've set yourself are being maintained or are being observed by the London NHS?
No, listen, you know, because you're at the coalface in relation to the NHS of experts, doctors, clinicians, nurses. They don't take pleasure from saying we told you so. They don't take pleasure. And all the predictions made by them have, I'm afraid, been realised. I'm hoping this gives a chance for SDPs and the Department of Health to pause. You'll be aware of the good news about the refreshes taking place as a consequence of the King's Fund report. I'm also considering, and I appreciate your views offline, about what we can do in the next phase in relation to more academic independent work to support STPs in the role they've got to perform. The key issue is this from the last report. It's simply not possible or sensible to reduce bed numbers at a time when our population is becoming more complex and growing. I think they've taken heed of that very important conclusion from the King's Fund report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And now let's go to the next question from Assembly Member Boff, room sizes.
Sorry. All new homes should be fit for purpose now and into the future, with enough space to ensure they can be used flexibly by a range of residents. That's why I've set this out in my new draft London plan. I've strengthened the policy on housing standards to make sure that all self-contained housing meets minimum housing space standards. Unlike my predecessor, my new planning policy actually sets minimum bedroom sizes and room widths and minimum space standards for private outside space, in addition to requiring minimum overall housing space standards. We need to deliver significantly more homes to meet Londoners' housing needs. This means higher density development, but not at the expense of housing quality. As I made clear in my new draft London plan, minimum housing space standards ensure that as densities increase, the quality of residential units is maintained. My London plan is the first to include minimum room sizes as well as minimum overall space standards for new homes, meaning we can be confident there is no risk that increasing density will lead to smaller homes with smaller rooms. As well as minimum housing standards, I'm making sure there is a genuine choice of housing for Londoners' diverse population. That's why I have a policy on accessible housing standards, which require additional space to ensure homes are accessible and adaptable. These additional space requirements specifically address the size of rooms, such as kitchens, bedrooms and bathrooms, as well as corridors and storage areas. My new policies also make sure that the important qualitative aspects of housing developments are addressed in the design of new homes. For example, that the site layout and orientation of buildings and windows provide privacy and daylight. Finally, we know that the most effective way to encourage people living in social housing who are under-occupying is to living in social housing who are under-occupying to downsize is to build attractive new homes that are well suited to their needs and to offer tenants any support they may need during the moving process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Why in your new London plan are boroughs now encouraged to resist new homes that go significantly above the minimum space standards?
So what we're encouraging boroughs to do is to increase the amount of family homes that are low rent, that are affordable. The evidence we have from the English Housing Survey is if you look at the family size homes that exist, only a third of the family homes in London are occupied by families with children. A third. The remaining two-thirds are occupied by a combination of multi-person households, single people, and childless couples. We're trying to address the overcrowding issue in these homes where there are grown children by having more small homes that they can go into that are affordable.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've correctly anticipated that I will ultimately be talking about overcrowding, but my specific question was about room sizes, and that boroughs are now encouraged, are saying that they are encouraged to resist new homes that provide room sizes above the minimum.
Well, it's for councils to consider the application on its merits using good design.
But this is in the London plan, Mr. Mayor. The boroughs are encouraged to resist. It's a statement in the plan which was not in the previous plan. And I credit you for putting minimum space standards in, but it's saying that actually what it effectively is saying, doesn't this mean that the minimum space standards are now become the maximum space standards for developments?
Well, I hope not. It's horses for courses. We need to have an increased densification of homes. We need more homes built. We're going to make sure they're of good quality. That's why we've got the minimum standards. In Outer London, for example, there'll, I suspect, be more family-sized homes, bigger homes, to use your words, not maximum being the minimum. I suspect in Inner London, where space is on a shortage and there's a great need for high-density homes, there may be homes where the space above the minimum is not quite as high as it would be in Outer London.
Can you anticipate, Mr Mayor, refusing a planning application if you felt the room sizes were too large?
It's for a local authority to consider application on its merits. Like, you know, only the big ones will come to me. I don't recall in the last 2 years turning down an application on the basis that the rooms are too big. What I have done is said that we want high density homes being built.
But over the past 2 years, this requirement wasn't in the plan. I'm talking specifically now about your proposals for the plan. You're saying to boroughs that they should discourage, or are encouraged to resist, we use the right words, encouraged to resist new homes that go significantly above the minimum space standard, which suggests that if they were to be referred to yourself for non-compliance with the London plan, there would be a situation where you would be turning down applications because they had room sizes that were too large.
Well, it's a hypothetical situation. What I can envisage is a situation where on a piece of land there could be high-density, good-quality homes, particularly affordable ones, and where there aren't, I may turn those down.
You may turn them down on the basis that the rooms are too large?
No, I will turn them down on the basis that we haven't got the density of homes we need or sufficient amount of affordable homes that we need.
Well, that surely, I mean, you know, that surely is, this is a statement that's never been in a plan before, that rooms can be too big. So therefore, it's giving you...
You're misquoting now, that's not what it says, but...
Encouraged to resist new homes that go significantly above the minimum space standards. That means that you could, at some future time, turn down an application. I am fishing here. I'm trying to see what this means. This is, you know, that there's a time in the future when you will turn down an application because the rooms are too large. Your planning team will refer it to you because it goes against, the borough has failed to resist new homes that go significantly above the room size.
Let me give you an example. Let me give you a hypothetical example. It's best to talk in hypothetical.
Well, I mean, this is the future, so everything's potentially hypothetical. You know,
so if, for example, there was an application for homes with rooms significantly above the minimum standards in an area where there's a chronic need for homes, where the developer and the council haven't ensured there's a high density in this area. It's suitable for high density because it's near a public transport hub. I can envisage, in those circumstances, me saying no.
That's interesting. There's been the Assembly that has some Assembly members have had a very long history of fighting for space standards, and I'm thinking particularly of Nicky Gavrod, fighting very hard to get minimum space standards in London. I don't know whether or not, she can speak for herself, but I don't know whether or not when she was fighting for minimum space standards, she thought they were going to be the maximum. Do you think that that's what she... can I move on? Can I move on, Ms. Mayor?
He doesn't expect you to speak for Assembly Member Gavron.
Sorry, no,
but I would like a question from him.
She can, of course, speak for
or
herself.
not, so we can move on.
You'll get a question. In the London plan, under what circumstances do you believe that two-bedroom units would be suitable family homes?
Well, if you had one child, it might be a family home. If you had two children of the same sex, it could be a family home. Yeah. Could be a family home where there's no children. I mean, all sorts of different permutations of families exist in London in 2018. I'm really sure I understand the question.
Many Londoners, Mr. Mayor, have experienced, many Londoners who are reliant upon social housing have experienced going into a one or two bedroom home, been allocated that by the council, and their family has grown. And they've realised that because of the state of housing in London, they effectively are locked into that home for possibly the entire child's life as a child, plus brothers and sisters. That's a very common thing, and I think every Assembly member has knocked on doors where that is the case. by specifying that those are family, that those can be family homes, don't you think that is moving away the prospect of removing overcrowding from London's map?
So one of the things we know in London is that those market price family homes that are built are often bought by investors or used as rented adult accommodation, because adults renting can pay far more in rent than, for example, a family could afford to pay in rent. And if you're speaking to the same families I speak to when I knock on doors, they couldn't afford to buy a market price family home or afford to pay the rent in a family price market home. So what we're doing is encouraging more lower rent social housing that's family size housing. So if you like to use your word, discouraging market price family homes. I gave you the stat, only 1/3 are used by couples with children, and encouraging more affordable, and our definition of affordable, rather than the old one, of family size homes, as we're trying to do.
Mr. Mayor, at the recent Health Committee meeting, we heard about some of the devastating examples of overcrowding, and that overcrowding can have on early years development. 350,000 young people are being brought up in overcrowded conditions. Do you understand those negative consequences of overcrowding?
I was one of those families. I lived it.
And do you understand that that those people in overcrowded conditions are looking to you to point to the resolution of their problems?
Which is why I'm saying fewer market-priced family homes which they can't afford, more affordable family homes which they can afford, but also for those families with adult children, what the adult children want is one-bedroom, two-bedroom homes they can move into, which means an overcrowded home where you have adult children can have two homes rather than one. One affordable family home and one affordable smaller home for the adult-grown children. It's because I recognise those needs, we're addressing them with a draft on the plan. And I'm disappointed that I'm being criticised for encouraging councils and developers to build good quality high-density homes to meet that need.
And you're aware, Mr. Mayor, that just downsizing will not resolve the problem of overcrowding in London. Are you aware of those figures? That if everybody who was living in the wrong-sized property had spare bedrooms, decided to downsize, we would still have a substantial overcrowding problem in London. You are aware of that?
The evidence of that is look what's happened 2 years on from the bedroom tax. Only 8% of people who've got to pay this have downsized. That shows we can use the government's policy as evidence that this sort of downsizing doesn't work. What we need is more genuinely affordable homes built for these families.
So you are aware of that, and yet in your London plan of 750,000 words, you mention overcrowding in homes only once, and in that you say it's a borough problem.
I'm looking forward to receiving your response to my draft housing strategy, my draft London plan, and I'll be examining all the changes you made to the previous Mayor's plan to see how I can learn from that as well.
We certainly will be doing a submission. Both the Assembly committees will be submitting a submission about that. I think there's general concern about making minimum space standards maximum. And if I could, to finish off, just refer you to one piece of work. In January 2017, a research study was done by Julia Park called 100 Years of Housing Space Standards, What Now? And I'm going to just read you the last sentence. It says, our politicians are finally beginning to talk about housing as a moral issue. Instead of settling for the least we can get away with, we need to start aiming for the best we can do. Is that something you'd be sympathetic to?
I'm the first mayor to appoint design advocates and to try and incorporate good design in all homes, including those that are affordable to Londoners. And I'm really proud of our track record in this area. I'm just disappointed that we have recent converts who were silent for the last 8 years and now waking up to this, and I welcome their conversion.
To conversion to?
Good quality homes for even those who can't afford to buy the market price stuff that those who can afford to can purchase.
Yeah. Google will be useful for anybody watching this now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, next question from Assembly Member Prince. TfL efficiencies. 0159.
Thank you, Chair. I was clear when I started as Mayor that I thought Transport for London was a good but flabby organisation. Despite having an operating grant from the government, fares still went up by more than 42% in the 8 years before I became Mayor. Under my direction, TfL is radically reducing its cost base and transforming the way it works to absorb a reduction of around £700 million per year in government funding. Due to government cuts, London TfL will soon be one of the only public transport systems in any big city in the Western world not subsidised by government. Through making structural and cultural changes across the organisation since I became Mayor, TfL is becoming more efficient and effective. Reducing annual operating costs by £1.2 billion over its 5-year business plan period will help TfL to achieve its core financial objective, to turn an operating deficit into a surplus by 2021-22. Last year, for the first time in TfL's history, it reduced operating costs by £153 million, and it is already ahead of the curve this year, exceeding operating cost savings targets by more than £138 million. This has been achieved by the biggest ever overhaul of the organisation, cutting management layers and reducing duplication to make transport safer, more reliable and more efficient. TfL will continue to cut day-to-day operating costs and capitalise on commercial opportunities to ensure it can provide a modern, affordable, accessible and sustainable transport network for all Londoners. This includes merging currently separate functions, such as engineering, to create efficiencies and reduce reliance on agency staff. TfL will deliver a further £600 million of operating cost savings in 18-19, around 40% higher than the target for this year. At the same time as delivering these changes, I have ditched plans by the previous Mayor to increase fares by a further 13%, kept travel affordable for Londoners by freezing fares, introduced the hopper. I'm extending the hopper later on this month, protecting all of TfL's travel concessions and continue to invest in the service.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In your manifesto, you promised that you would not make savings from cuts to spending on better services and more capacity. Do you accept, Mr. Mayor, that the cancelling of the 27 new trains for the Jubilee lines and the Northern lines have meant that Londoners won't, on those lines, get a better service and won't get more capacity?
No, I don't apologise for postponing the purchase of the Northern Line and Jubilee Line trains. I'd have thought the Conservative Party is in favour of value for money, is in favour of efficiencies. Nobody in their right mind would invest money servicing their car, spending money making sure it's fit for purpose, then buy a new car because years ago they'd promised to buy a new car at a certain time. We've got a new timetable on the Northern Line, increased number of trains during rush hours, huge improvements coming on stream for the Jubilee Line, and I'm really pleased and proud of the progress we've made.
Mr. Mayor, only last week one of the volunteers on a voluntary service that I do could not actually get onto Canary Wharf station. That not only was there crowding, but it was so bad that she couldn't actually get onto the station. Do you really think, Mr. Mayor, that by cancelling these extra trains for the Jubilee line that she won't be in that same predicament again?
Well, Chair, it's worth just reminding this volunteer through Senator Prince that the new trains couldn't be bought tomorrow. They take time to come to be, when you procure them. It takes years for them to come on stream. If we procure Piccadilly this year, delayed by the previous guy, they'll come on stream in a few years' time. But let me explain about Jubilee. Because you've asked about Jubilee line. Sorry. On the Jubilee line, we're planning to extend the evening peak this year. We're currently working on proposals which will increase train frequencies in the busy sections. The Elizabeth line, which begins this year, will lead to 10,000 fewer journeys eastbound on the Jubilee line because of the Elizabeth line. There'll be 5,000 fewer trips because of the Stratford to Canary Wharf connection. So the good news for your volunteer is because of the new Elizabeth line coming on stream later on this year, she will see huge improvements to her daily experience using the Jubilee line. because
so
of using Elizabeth line.
can I get, when I see her this evening, Mr Mayor, can I give her an assurance then that in 6 months' time she won't be in that same predicament?
What you can say to her is, if I spent money not needed to buy new trains not needed, she'd see a change in about 8 years' time. She will see this year an improvement with the Elizabeth line coming on stream later on this year, because there'll be fewer journeys being used on Jubilee line, so there'll be more space for her. Stratford to Canary Wharf, 5,000 fewer journeys. Eastbound and Jubilee line, 10,000 fewer journeys, and she can use the Elizabeth line or the Jubilee line depending where she's going to and from.
So was that?
And she'll save money as well because of the fares.
Was that a yes or a no? Sorry, I missed it.
So you said 6 months, and
you can pick any month you like. I don't mind.
After the Elizabeth line is open, which is after 6 months.
Okay, so after the Elizabeth line, I can give her the assurance that she won't be standing outside Canary Wharf station waiting to get onto the platform.
You can guarantee to her she will see improvements sooner under my plans than the plans I inherited from the previous mayor.
Is that a promise you're making now to my volunteer? No? Yes, no? Simple question. That's interesting. Oh, well, I'll definitely tell her that. Well, she'll be delighted. Mr Mayor, when you said in your manifesto about the transport for London being good in certain areas, but inefficient and flabby, and that you were going to cut the flab, and you've given some very good examples of where you have cut the flab, and again, credit to TfL for doing that. When you talked about cutting flab, though, Mr Mayor, did you mean by flab lip funding? Is that included in the flab that you were going to cut?
No, councils received more lip funding from me than the previous mayor, which I'm sure you welcome.
But Mr Mayor, you and I know that after promising not to, you are cutting lip funding this year to.
I'm really proud that we're giving councils more money through lip than the previous mayor.
But you promised not to cut this year's, and you have done it. Are you denying that you're cutting the?
What I'm saying is next year.
Are you? No, I'm talking.
What I'm saying is next year councils will receive less lip money than I'd originally planned, but they still receive more than the previous mayor, and the year after they'll receive around £200 million, which is much more than the previous mayor. And councils are grateful that we're giving them more money than the previous mayor.
But they're not receiving the amount you promised them, are they? You promised not to cut lip funding, and over the 4-year period you will be reducing lip funding, won't you, Mr Mayor?
So my announcement on lip funding...
Put your hands up, it's easy.
My announcement on lip funding is far more generous than the previous mayor. Even though for next year there'll be a slight reduction, it's still more generous than the previous mayor.
But Mr Mayor, you promised not to cut the lip funding, and you have. Well, can't you be big enough just to admit that, and we move on to the next question?
There's a clear choice people have. The Conservative mayor, reduced lip funding. The Labour mayor, more lip funding.
Didn't reduce it.
You obviously
actually
have...
a lie.
No, well, I wouldn't accuse the mayor of doing that, but he has a very strange way of reading facts and figures. Perhaps he's been taking lessons from one of his members of Parliament, Diane Abbott. I'll move on because I'm getting bored myself with that. Looking at taxi card spending, is that flab as well, Mr Mayor?
I'm really sorry, taxpayer-funded Assembly member is bored, heaven forbid.
No, I'm bored with you not telling the truth, Mr Mayor. I'm bored with you not being big enough to admit.
Assembly Member Prince, can I have a question?
You've had the question.
Well, repeat the question, please.
The question
because we're all so bored we've forgotten the question. So, can we have a question?
Thank you for your impartiality, Madam Chairman.
That's okay.
Do you consider the taxi card to be spending a flab as well, Mr Mayor? Do you
this is a really important point, Chair, because there's nothing worse than scaring older people about a service that's not been taken away, but giving them the impression it's been taken away. Can I just, through you, Chair, assure all those older people scared by Tory propaganda that taxi card is safe and they'll receive as good a service next year as they have in the past, and it's disgraceful for bored Tories to be scaring older Londoners.
Thank you. Mr Prince?
Well, Madam Chairman, I think you'll find it was the Labour Chair of London Councils who raised his concerns about your cuts in lip funding and your cuts to taxi card. So is it Labour, your own party, who are scaremongering, Mr Mayor?
Well, let me say to the board Tory member, I have not proposed to cut the taxi card service. In fact, I've given a categorical guarantee that will continue to provide funding for the same level of service in every part of London. And Tories scaring older Londoners should be ashamed, bored or otherwise.
You should be ashamed of telling blatant lies.
You're the one who's scaring people by the fact you can't keep your promises, Mr Mayor. Okay, well, I think, Mr Mayor...
Assembly Member Prince, you've already gone over time.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate that.
By 11 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for...
Okay, let's now move on to... The next question is Assembly Member Pigeon. And it's about the Met Police protection, Child Protection Inspection and Post-Inspection updates at 301 to you.
Let me start by saying, Chair, that any child who's neglected, abused or exploited is one too many. And it's our duty as politicians, as professionals and as adults to make sure that our children are kept safe. This is why protecting children is at the heart of the new police and crime plan, and why we're investing more in monetary value, time and resource to protect some of our most vulnerable Londoners. We've moved the Met away from overly focusing on a narrow 7 crimes that existed under the previous mayor, the so-called MOPAC 7. This was a central criticism of the HMIC report on child protection in 2016, so that the police can focus on the significantly more important job of protecting vulnerable people. I know the Commissioner's committed to improving outcomes for children. Given the grave consequences associated with the failure to do so, we've been very clear that changes must be delivered and that we will continue to hold senior leaders to account until they can evidence genuine improvements. Immediately after the report was published, we established a multi-agency child protection oversight group chaired by Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden. The membership includes the MPS, MOPAC, College of Policing, National Police Chiefs, Council leads, HMIC and the Children's Commissioner. But you're right, concerns in terms of improved outcomes for children is a concern, and this is something that has been raised relentlessly at the Oversight Group and the Met Oversight Board and directly with the Commissioner. The Child Safeguarding Delivery Group has formally requested that HMIC FRS provide ongoing support throughout 2018. HMIC FRS are considering this on the proviso that it can be resourced and it would focus on reality testing.
Thank you very much indeed. I've been raising concerns about child safeguarding for many years, but the issues remain. The Inspector's latest quarterly report, so this is from November 2017, shows that 93% of Met investigations into child protection were inadequate and needed improvement. So what action have you taken since November 2017 to assure yourself that improvements will be made quickly?
I have a long list, Chair, of, I'll write to you to save time, of the things we've done, but just to give you, just firstly, it is not good enough. We have continued the oversight, asking the tough questions, but put more structures in place so we can have evidence to demonstrate there's going to be genuine change. What I'm told is that it will take some time, I'm afraid, to turn things around. But your questions highlighted the fact that the police know there are problems, but there doesn't seem to be a swift turnaround as there should be. That's why you're right, as indeed Sophie Linden and I are right, to continue to put pressure on the police. And that's why what I've announced today is new in the sense of asking the HMIC FRS to provide the ongoing support so we can have external pressure as well.
Did you read the November 2017 report?
Yes, I did.
You did. I mean, it's shocking. It was shocking to members of the police committee when we were going through it. But
we also had a meeting with the Commissioner and the Deputy to discuss it as well. And as you'll appreciate, the 6 weekly meetings that Sophie Linden chairs is trying to grapple with this. There were I mean, this is not an excuse, but there was some good news in there as well. Doesn't overcome the bad news though.
No. How confident are you that your steering group that you talked about, your child safeguarding group, is fit for purpose in the fact that it only meets every 6 weeks?
Well, because of the people involved, so it has got a high calibre and the right people meeting regularly. That's not the only oversight taking place, but the communication and contact isn't simply on a 6 weekly basis. In between meetings, there's regular conversation and there's regular oversight, and it's one of the things that I raise regularly. To be fair, the Commissioner raises regularly with me when she meets me, as well as me raising it with her.
Well, I welcome the idea that you've got the inspector hopefully coming in to sit and really hold the feet to the fire on this. But obviously, I appreciate in your original answer some of this is a consequence of previous administration, but obviously you're coming up to nearly 2 years in post, and the report shows children remain at serious risk across London. So
and the context is just the demand and volume of offences is going...
shot up, absolutely. But because progress hasn't been good enough, and the inspector clearly says the Met is not achieving an acceptable level of good results for children in London, what I really want to understand from you is, when will Londoners have the child protection service that they can rely on?
I've asked the same question to the Commissioner and others, and they can't give me a date. And there's a good reason why they can't, because the volume and complexity of issues is going up, and the systemic changes take some time. Shortage of detectives. They've trained 6,500 officers to be specially trained, but it's in the context of the other cuts the police are facing. The good news, though, is now a priority, whereas it wasn't in the past. The good news now is that the Commissioner, senior officers are taking personal responsibility and accountability for this issue, and Sophie's chairing this group, but we'll carry on revisiting this to make sure we get progress. I can't give you a date because the experts can't give me a date.
But I am encouraged that you personally have been getting behind this, and it's something we were concerned last week when we questioned MOPAC. But have you got any idea when you would expect the Met's child abuse investigations to start to really have turned the corner and to be fit for purpose?
So we've got the officers who've been trained. We're bringing in new detectives. We're still just, I think, across the organisation about 750 short. We've done the direct entry recruitment. That's less than 200. So we're still short detectives. So we're training up other officers. The oversight is taking place. I'm confident that the Commission understands how seriously we take this. I'm confident that she takes it seriously as well. Where I'm less confident is the ability for a big organisation to completely change its emphasis and stuff. And these are vulnerable young people who sometimes don't articulate their concerns. But as you said, in 93% of the cases, that can't be used as an excuse, because, as you've said, 93% of the cases they were identified.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then the next question, we go to the question from an Assembly Member Dismore, Met Investigation Policy 0262.
Thank you. We cannot shy away from the fact that the Met are having to do more with less due to the government's failure to properly fund policing at a time where our city's population is growing and crime is becoming more complex. Since 2010-11, the Met's general grant funding from the government has fallen by more than £700 million, or nearly 40% in real terms on a like-for-like basis. This has led to a loss of a third of police staff posts, down from 14,330 to 9,985. Two-thirds of police community support officer posts, down from 4,607 to 1,591, as well as 114 police station front counters and 120 police buildings. Further savings will still be needed due to the government cuts, and the Met are running out of options. Despite smoke and mirrors claims about increased investment in policing before Christmas, ministers have consistently failed to meet, for example, the cost of inflation, the police pay rise which they announced last year, future pay rises, the costs associated with rising demands faced by the police, or reversing previous cuts. All this makes the already tough choices facing the Met about how it prioritises its limited resources all the more difficult. It's not for the Mayor of London to direct operational policing in this city. These are decisions taken by the Commissioner. I'm acutely aware of the pressure the Met are under, and the Commissioner has my full backing to do the job we expect of her, using her professional judgment and experience as a police officer to use the resources at her disposal to keep our city as safe as possible. As you know, I'm doing everything in my lawful powers as Mayor to increase these resources, but that cannot make up the entirety of the shortfall in government funding. All that said, I think it's important to give a brief clarification on the policy you describe. The Met's crime assessment policy was introduced in September last year. Its purpose is to help officers to assess every allegation they receive and reach a decision on the best and most appropriate response. Triaging the police response is not new. Each allegation is assessed against a series of principles, taking into consideration the different factors involved in each case. Not only does this enable officers to reach a considered decision, it allows for an early and realistic conversation with victims about what can be done with the crime they've reported. There is a long list of the most serious and high harm crimes that are mandatory for further investigation. And this is not unique to the Met. Other forces around the country have similar approaches to crime.
Thank you for that very full reply, Mr Mayor, and obviously the government are in large part responsible for this approach. But I have now seen the Met's crime assessment policy documents, which set out what crimes are to be assessed as, quotes, out for investigation. And the scope is pretty wide. What percentage of crimes reported to the police are now not going to be investigated further, do you think?
You know, as a consequence of the triaging?
Yes.
It's too early to say yet, but I'm happy to, once we've got the first figures in, to let you know if there's been a difference in compare and contrast. That might help.
Okay. I just wanted to, you mentioned the policy as being an operational decision by senior police officers. I just wanted your confirmation that that is the case and it's not a strategic decision which should have been taken by you or MOPAC, because obviously due to government-imposed budget cuts, only serious crimes are now going to be investigated. And following the laid down crime assessment principles and the flow chart, it looks like to me most crimes are going to be not investigated at all because of being assessed as out.
No, just to reassure you, I mean, this is a decision taken by the Commissioner and her team, and I support the fact they've got to ration the support they can give to victims of crime. What I'd recommend, because it does set out quite clearly the rationale behind this, is DAC Mark Simmons' blog on the crime assessment policy. He sets out the rationale behind it, the reasons behind it, and the potential consequences of it as well. And look, police officers want to investigate every single allegation of crime, but they realise that the cuts mean they're pressurised and they want to focus on those crimes where there's vulnerability, where there's victims and which are clearly more serious.
Well, obviously police officers want to protect the public by preventing and deterring crime and solving them when they do take place. Isn't imposing compulsory limitations like this on officers' investigations risk appearing to the public as raising the white flag, which damages police morale on the one hand and undermines public confidence on the other, discouraging Londoners from reporting crime, thinking it's going to be screened out and not investigated?
No, I mean, all members of the public should report crimes. We've made it easier to report crimes by using the internet, by using the telephone, by using the non-emergency line. All crime should be reported, and it's really important for the police to receive information. What you'll now have is honesty and transparency from the police, whereas in the past you may be led to believe there'll be a huge amount of police resources spent to investigate a crime which will probably be not solved. The police will now, up front, try and be honest and candid with you. Some police forces around the country, Merseyside is a good example, which has been doing this for a while now, and the Met Police, as you'd appreciate, are learning from other forces around the country. It's not, by any stretch of the imagination, the police throwing up the white flag. It's a continuation of the triaging that's always taken place by the police service.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much. We now go to Assembly Member McCartney, Behind Every Great City campaign.
Thank you very much. 2018 is a very special year. It marks a momentous occasion in the history of our country and city, 100 years since the first women won the right to vote. London was at the centre of the suffrage movement, with our very own Trafalgar Square the location for many of the rallies and marches that took place in the struggle to secure this basic right. The Behind Every Great City campaign will mark this centenary through celebrating London's role in the women's suffrage movement and the progress that's been made on women's equality over the past 100 years. Importantly, the campaign will include real action to tackle gender inequality in London, something we know still exists in our great city. I want the campaign to establish City Hall as a beacon for gender equality and encourage Londoners and London's businesses and organisations to support women's rights and gender equality. The campaign programme is already packed. One of the main moments will be the unveiling of the statue of Millicent Fawcett by Turner-winning artist Gillian Wearing, OBE, in Parliament Square later this spring. This statue will remarkably be the first of a woman and the first by a woman in Parliament Square. This will be complemented by a cultural programme that celebrates and educates Londoners, young and old, about the suffrage movement and the need for gender equality in 2018. I will also lead by example by announcing GLA group-wide policies that tackle gender equality head-on and set best practice for organisations in London and the rest of the country. These policies will have specific performance indicators once announced. The success of the year-long campaign will also be measured through the volume of engagement we generate with Londoners and key stakeholders that can help amplify and champion this critical issue. I hope the Assembly will join me in celebrating the centenary this year and in showcasing and advocating for the incredible women that power this great city.
Thank you, and I think this is a wonderful campaign and has great potential. And obviously you have great influence over what happens in this building and the GLA family, but what would you hope the impact of it would be outside of this building? Do you see, and have you got any ability to measure the impact of it in changing practice elsewhere, for example?
So we're setting up KPIs to make sure we can do that, but we want to change attitudes. We want to change the culture of our city and the country. We want young girls walking around our city to see statues of great women, to see posters of great women, to see when they travel the underground, the world's biggest public art gallery, works of art that are done by women artists. We want them to aspire to be brilliant scientists, brilliant journalists, brilliant lawyers, and all the brilliance we see, but unfortunately in a minority. And so there's a whole range of events that are taking place across the city. History is very important, how we devise a curriculum that celebrates women activists in the past, suffragists and suffragettes. We have a women Prime Minister. We're working with the government in relation to how we can use the government's significant power to celebrate and commemorate this year, mark the progress we've made, but also use it as a springboard going forward. Central government, cities across the country, councils across London. Businesses are very, very excited as well. Many innovative businesses are realising that the evidence is, as we saw late last year, if your business fully utilises your female staff, you will be more profitable. And so we're looking at a whole host of policies, from childcare-friendly policies to giving part-time workers decent remuneration and terms and conditions, mentoring, sponsorship to support girls and women fulfil their potential.
So from that answer, is it the case that your team are working with other cities, and are you working with local authorities across London as well?
So we'll be doing a presentation shortly to London councils. I met with the leader last week and she and I agreed that there would be a presentation to them. There are some councils already organising events. I know of some in Waltham Forest and some in Barking and Dagenham. There are others organised across the city. We're trying to map what's taking place so we can have a calendar of events so people can go to a local event or a sub-regional event or a regional event or another event, but also we don't want to have duplication. Somebody will want to go to an event but then say, oh no, there's another event taking place at the same time. So a whole host of events taking place. International Women's Day will be a week-long worth of celebrations. I'm swallowing my own thunder by saying, rather than the scoop being used, we're going to use Trafalgar Square for the great event that takes place outside City Hall annually and stuff. So a whole host of events taking place. And what I'd say to Londoners, whether you're a business, whether you're a local authority, whether you're a charity, whether you're a young person, whether you're, if you want to get involved in the campaign, get in touch with City Hall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I just briefly say that thank you for your invitation to the Assembly, and it is on the Assembly's Bureau of Leaders agenda. And also we look forward to you joining us as a special guest at the Assembly's IWD event in the living room on the 8th of March. Thank you. And let's now go to the next question from Assembly Member Shah. Met Police detention incidents attributed to mental health issues.
Thank you for your question, and I know you're campaigning on mental health issues, and can I thank you for the campaign that you do on these issues. This matter brings together two of my priority areas: ensuring that we have an effective police service and tackling inequalities to improve mental health. The most recent data shows that four individuals detained under Mental Health Act were taken to Met Police custody between January and October 2017. That's 4. This number has fallen from 2013 and 14, when there were 79 such detentions, which is a testament to the partnership work that has taken place in recent years. We know, though, the Met receives a mental health-related call every 5 minutes. About a fifth of these come from hospitals or mental health units. We also know from an NHS provider survey that staff shortages and changes in mental health commissioning are having a detrimental impact on their ability to ensure sufficient mental health provision. This ultimately comes down to a lack of government funding. In both January and October 2017, Her Majesty's Inspectorate highlighted their concerns about the impact this is having on the police, saying, and I quote, "The police, who should be the service of last resort, are becoming the service of first resort," which is wrong. I agree. This is a drain on resources and is not the way we should be dealing with vulnerable people. The police and health services are stretched to their limit. The MPS is getting better at identifying, recording and responding to a mental health related call. This has led to a 92% reduction in the Section 136 detention of people suffering mental health in police custody. Last year, I launched the Thrive London campaign, a new movement to improve mental health and well-being across the capital, remove the stigma and improve people's confidence. I've also launched the Section 136 pathway and health-based places of safety specification. This new guidance will ensure vulnerable Londoners detained under Section 136 are offered timely, high-quality care.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have highlighted the issue about underfunding of NHS, and I understand from the information I have is that it is shocking that 50% of CCGs are planning to reduce the proportion of their budget being spent on mental health service in 2017 and 18. That obviously has trigger effect on all the services, including the pressure on Met Police when it comes to dealing with mental health incidents and the people suffering from that. My question is, police officers are entrusted with legal powers under the Mental Health Act, such as the power of detention for those in crisis. What role do you think the public, the people would want to see the police playing in relation to mental health?
Good question. Look, I think many members of the public, if not themselves, have family members who have mental ill health. And they would say they want their family members, their friends, themselves to be treated and looked after by health professionals, not detained by hard-working police officers who should be catching criminals, deterring crime. But some people with mental ill health do go on to cause harm to themselves and cause harm to others and can commit criminal offences. I don't think we should expect police officers' time to be spent, for example, driving around looking for a health-based place of safety for someone who's in a mental health crisis, or for someone with mental ill health who needs treatment to be detained in a police cell. The good news is the numbers detained in a police cell has gone down. The bad news is too much police time, more than ever, is being spent responding to Londoners with mental health issues.
I mean, yeah, it is true. Again, looking at the figures, Met Police dealt with some 61,000 calls relating to mental health in the past financial year. Given the bleak scenario, what can you do, given your position, to sort of put pressure on government for better funding, sustained funding, so that mental health generally doesn't suffer, and indeed police do not have that extra pressure of dealing with mental health issues?
So you'll be aware, because of the heated discussion we had before, about some people not accepting the link between mental health and knife crime. There is a link. But I'm afraid if you're cutting mental health provision, don't be surprised if there's an increase in people who should be looked after not being looked after. So we're spending some money, mental health around young people, not enough to fill the gap. The phrase used in relation to mental health is to describe mental health as the Cinderella service.
Indeed.
The bad news is we've been hearing that phrase for years and years and years, nothing's changed.
True.
I met recently Claire Murdoch, who is a very impressive former nurse who now is in charge of this area, and she's agreed to work with me, my health advisor, to see if we can pull together some of our resources, get rid of silos, to help young people in particular with mental health issues in schools, but also try and improve CAM services as well. I've got to be honest, My abilities, because of lack of resources and lack of statutory powers to do much here, is limited. But dealing with mental ill health is really important. That's why we set up Thrive London. It's one of our priorities. I try and talk about this all the time to remove the stigma. You'll be aware, because you previously raised this, in minority communities, even more stigma. We've got to support the voluntary sector. They work so incredibly hard. And so when I talk about community seed funding around knife crime, I'm talking about these community groups with a little bit of money can do a huge amount of good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your frank and honest answer. Thank you.
Okay, next question, Assembly Member Copley, tackling homelessness in London.
Thank you for your question, and again, Tom, for your campaigning on this issue for many, many years now. As we know, there has been a shocking rise in homelessness and rough sleeping over recent years. At the start of his first term, the previous mayor promised to end rough sleeping by 2012. By the end of his time in office in 2016, it had doubled on his watch. During my first year in office, the rise in rough sleeping in the capital halted for the first time in nearly a decade. It's wrong that in a city as prosperous as ours, over 8,000 people felt last year they had no choice other than to sleep rough. My goal is to ensure there is a route off the street for every rough sleeper in London. We need government, councils and other charities to work together to make this a reality. Our new No Nights Sleeping Rough task force, which brings together key councils and charities, is starting to make progress with the most entrenched rough sleepers. This winter, we also got all 33 local authorities to agree to join me in opening cold weather shelters every day that temperatures are sub-zero. Under the previous mayor, the policy was to wait 3 days of freezing weather to be forecast before they opened. London needs more resources, and we need them to rethink on our policies in housing, public services and welfare to tackle long-term causes of homelessness and rough sleeping. I want to start by saying a couple of things. I want to welcome the contribution made by the charities across London. We've now set up a new London Homeless Charities Group, bringing together 18 charities. We've raised over £85,000 being donated by over 1,600 generous Londoners. But also this winter, we launched a campaign to encourage people to refer anyone they see sleeping rough in their area through the StreetLink website and app. And we've seen over 2,000 referrals to StreetLink made by conscientious Londoners. This is double the number of referrals from the same time last year.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I fully endorse what you say, particularly about the StreetLink app, which is incredibly good innovation. On the subject of innovation, I recently met with the Homelessness and Brain Injury Project, which is researching the link between traumatic brain injury and homelessness. And I'm pleased to say they received funding from the GLA, I think from your Homelessness Innovation Fund, and they so far trained 250 homelessness sector staff in brain injury awareness. Would you agree that there needs to be a much more joined-up approach between health and homelessness? And would devolution of health powers to London assist with that?
Oh, absolutely. And this is one of the things that we've got to realise, that people who are sleeping rough, street homelessness, often have complex medical issues. Sometimes they're deeply entrenched. We need more joined upness, and I think with greater health devolution, we could do a lot more. Just think about what we've managed to do with our convening powers, bringing together charities, doing the StreetLink app. If we had more joined upness, I'm sure we could prevent people getting on the streets in the first place. And as I said, welfare benefits, health issues, alcohol and drug dependency are all interrelated often with people with who are sleeping rough.
Absolutely, and I mean the project is going to report in June, but I think already some of their interim findings are very interesting. Just moving on, you talked about the record of the previous mayor who did have a target for ending rough sleeping by the end of 2012, which of course he, as you say, he not only missed, but rough sleeping sadly doubled. But I was wondering if you were going to set any targets around rough sleeping and homelessness in London during the course of your mayoralty.
So we've got a number of targets in relation to trying to get more people referred, more people getting help via the donations we've received. I've looked at some of the other targets others have set. I've seen the targets set, for example, by the Mayor of Greater Manchester. I've seen the targets set by, which was, I think, to end rough sleeping by 2020. I've seen the government aims to halve rough sleeping by 2022 and end it completely by 2027. Bear in mind my experience over the first 20 months. I think the government's target of ending it completely by 2027, because of their policies, welfare benefits, housing issues, other cuts we know about in the NHS, mental health, is probably one that's most realistic, not the one that's most desirable. We should try and rough sleeping as soon as we possibly can. The problem is, with the best one in the world, I can set a target without the joined upness, without the devolution, without the resources, without a change in government policy around welfare benefits and housing. It can't be achieved, so it'd be meaningless. And just to remind ourselves, because I can hear heckling from Boris Johnson supporters, his target was in 2008 to end it completely by 2012. By 2016, it hadn't ended, it had doubled. And that's why they're so miserable and grumpy over there.
To say, I thought I was asking the questions. Your group's out of time. Just to say, we do on the Assembly, as you know, Mr. Mayor, find mayors setting themselves targets very helpful because it does help us to hold them to account. But I do. It's not pantomime season's over, guys.
He's behind you.
Well, I do absolutely hear what you say about the government and the amount of time, so I can't, I'm afraid, ask you any more questions about the government.
Mr. Copley, you were so interrupted by colleagues on my right. If you want to put a question, I'll use chair's privilege and say to you, please put your question.
Well, just a very, very quick one. We have a new Secretary of State for DWP. We know government welfare policy has a major impact on homelessness. Are you and your officials going to be meeting with her to discuss some of the government policies in this area around welfare?
We're in the process of drafting a letter congratulating her on her new job and looking forward to working with her, but also setting out some of the consequences of government policies over the recent past. You'll be aware, at recent MQTs, we discussed universal credit rollout, which is a particular concern that I have at the moment in relation to what DWP are doing.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. It's in the name. We go all the way down to a question in the name of Assembly Member Twycross. Sorry. No, I don't want to miss out my UKIP colleague. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Curtin. Green areas in London.
This question, Chair, is a bit puzzling. I've not invented a new term called green cover. Green cover is a term that has long been used. In fact, it has also been used by the previous administration and featured in the previous Mayor's Climate Change Adaptation Strategy and the All London Green Grid Supplementary Planning Guidance. Green cover is the total area covered by green vegetation and water services across the capital. So it's not only land that's public managed and publicly accessible, which is recognised as green space, but also those green and blue spaces that have no public access, like farmland, private gardens, green roofs, street trees and rain gardens. I think it's a term that Londoners are more than capable of understanding, and it reflects the different green features we have across the city and the range of benefits provided. Contrary to the impression given in the question, my plans won't lead to a drastic reduction in green open space as suggested, quite the opposite. My draft New London plan includes policies that protect important green and open spaces and seeks to create new areas of publicly accessible green and open space, especially in areas where access is deficient. This is a major achievement as London is set to grow.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, there is a difference between green cover and green open space. For example, if a building has a roof garden on it, that you define that as having green cover, but that wouldn't be green open space. And I think the concerns that many people in London have is that you can put up a new building, put a roof garden on it, for example, you'd lose some green open space, but then you're measuring green cover. You've lost the green open space, but you're defining the green cover as being the same. If you excuse the pun, that's a cover for losing green open space. Is that not true?
So I've used the definition used by the previous guy. If you're not happy with it, respond to the draft London plan and we'll look into the definition you want us to use. But I think the impression you were creating was I'd invented a new definition to try and have a smokescreen. I'm not. In fact, I'm the person that's saying no to building on metropolitan land. I'm the person saying no to building on the greenbelt. And so I want to get to 50% of our city being green, which is the target to be a national park city.
But do you mean green cover or green open space when you say 50%?
I use the definitions that's already there in relation to the green cover.
So you want 50% green cover, but your target is not 50% green open space. And when you conflate the two terms, or people are confused. They just see the word green and automatically will think green open space. But we might lose. Obviously, you say you're going to protect the green belt, and that's, I do appreciate that. But there's pocket parks and small open spaces, and also gardens could be lost. People could build in their garden, for example, stick a roof garden on the top, and that would be a loss of green open space.
Because the previous government allowed homeowners to build up to 50% of their garden under permitted development. So a lot of your criticisms appear to be aimed at those lot over there, rather than me. I'm the guy seeking to protect green space. That's why earlier on today, Assemblyman Curtin, you'll, I'm sure, welcome my announcement of financial support of £1 million to fund 55 community green space projects across London.
Okay, well, I'm unfortunately out of time.
Okay, Assembly Member, you're out of time. Now let's move then to the next question, and that's in the name of Assembly Member Duval instead of Twycross. Small and medium enterprises in London.
Thank you, Chair.
0307.
Thank you. Small and medium-sized enterprises are the lifeblood of London's economy, and their success is fundamental to London's growth. Government hikes in business rates, rules around permitted development, and lack of investment in infrastructure are making life difficult for SMEs in London. That's why I'm determined to establish the right conditions to support SMEs and ensure that they can grow, while at the same time ensure that they are prepared to address possible challenges that they may face in the coming years. Both the Economic Development Strategy and the new Draft London Plan highlight the need to balance land use for commercial, community, civic and cultural purposes. I remain committed to working with boroughs to ensure that affordable workspace is protected, and I'll be using planning policy to protect the amount of workspace available, and I'm offering loans and grants to fund the development of additional workspaces. The draft Economic Development Strategy also commits to supporting start-ups and small businesses through the London Growth Hub by promoting access to affordable workspace, finance and business support. Through the London Growth Hub, I'm also funding a range of projects that support start-ups and SMEs. We're delivering a range of masterclasses and mentoring support across various co-working spaces in London. And in the next few days, I'll be launching a project which will provide free advice to those London-based SMEs that either want to renegotiate their property leases or sign on in the new premises. This pilot project aims to fill a gap by which small businesses can't access reliable, affordable legal advice when signing their leases. In the coming months, I'll also be launching new initiatives to give SMEs access to meet new buyers and access public procurement, with initiatives that will specifically support those Londoners that face the greatest barriers to starting or growing their business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. In your economic development strategy, you talk about supporting London Partners' business growth programme, which supports SMEs to grow in outer London and grow and expand in outer London. Can you give us a bit more information of how you will ensure that businesses have adequate physical space for their growing businesses at this particular time?
Thank you for your question. You'll know from your experience in your neck of the woods, I've visited Greenwich regularly, the concerns that are raised there. A number of things we're doing. Firstly, European funding has been really important for business support, skills and regeneration in those parts of London. One of the criteria the EU have had is where you are based and the challenges you have. So we'll be calling on the government to provide clear assurances there. We've established the London Workspace Board to identify the challenges, I think I launched it in Greenwich actually, to identify the challenges the workspace sector is facing and how these can be addressed. And I'm working with the Centre for London to explore new models for managing meanwhile workspaces, but also supporting SMEs to access workspace by facilitating joint working with local authorities to gather information that's on publicly owned space which can be used, exploring innovative solutions to workplace demands such as multi-storey development through the Good Growth Fund, but also we're trying to unlock homes and space for firms to scale up in those areas. And one of the other things we're doing finally is trying to help local authorities under pressure to allow housing, inappropriate housing, on some of this industrial workspace that could be used for a combination of housing and industrial workspace.
Now, one of the things you mentioned earlier is about that gap, financial gap for some SMEs and small firms to access money. I think your economic development strategy describes a number of partners, one of those partners being the European Investment Bank, in terms of providing some seed money for investment. What impact and what plans of leaving the EU, what will they have on in terms of SMEs, and what's the strategy for bridging that gap?
Well, the Brexit sector analysis highlighted that the UK's benefited from 7.8 billion euros of European Investment Bank investment in infrastructure. SMEs received 666 million euros in European investment loans since 2015 alone. The UK would lose access to both of these funding sources, which means SMEs would lose access to these sources. We've been working with the Investment Bank over the last year in order to secure their participation in the energy efficiency work that Senator Cooper knows about, but also the SME fund. We're hoping to make progress in this short term, but the bad news is if we leave the EU, it's not surprising, we may not be able to access these funds.
And your independent assessment issues that you've published in terms of some of those issues, are you planning to take those back into government to talk about strategies of minimising some of the potential adverse impacts of leaving the EU?
I mean, the good news is that because by March we'll hopefully have resolved the issue around transition, we've got an opportunity in March and October to deal with the actual trade deals in record time, and the expert analysis, and there was some further work done by this commissioned by the Scottish Government, provides the evidence that the government should look at in relation to which deal is best for our country, accepting we're leaving the EU, but saying to the government, these trade deals lead to investment, jobs, trade, whereas a trade deal like this will lead to fewer jobs, fewer trade, less investment.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next question is from Assembly Member Desai. Mayor's plan to tackle violent extremism.
London is a great city, full of amazing people from all backgrounds who celebrate our city's openness and diversity. I'm determined to take every step necessary to maintain and protect this great city and its residents from those who seek to undermine it, those who wish to spread hatred and intolerance, and those who wish to kill, injure and maim innocent people in the name of an ideology. As the experts have warned, we can't escape the fact that the capital faces a growing threat from violent extremism. The UK has recently seen an unprecedented shift in the threat of terrorism. In 2017, London suffered 4 deadly attacks, including from non-Londoners, with more being thwarted thanks to the bravery and hard work of our police. Tackling hate crime and encouraging greater social integration is at the heart of our mission for a greater, safer and more secure city. And this new dedicated Countering Violent Extremism CVE programme is part of that. The new CVE programme is designed to improve and renew efforts to tackle violent extremism from the so-called Islamic State and Daesh to the far right, and aims to empower all Londoners to speak out against extremism to help keep London safe. One of my first acts in office was to commission Lord Harris to ensure that London is as prepared as possible to respond to terror attacks, and I'm glad that well over 2/3 of the recommendations are in place, with many more in train. I also made clear in my police and crime plan that I am and remain determined to stand up against hate crime and intolerance. This Countering Violent Extremism programme is about ensuring that we're doing everything possible to prevent violent extremism in the first place. We'll investigate how we can bolster the safeguard and provision for the vulnerable, how we can stop those who target vulnerable people and promote terror, and what more can be done by all agencies to stop the spread of hateful, violent extremist materials. I've been clear that to do this, engagement with Londoners is essential. I'll drive forward this work by listening to what Londoners have to say, as well as working with experts to identify what more can be done to empower communities to speak out and challenge violent extremist views. We'll engage with partners to see how we can strengthen and integrate safeguarding work that is already taking place across London, ensuring that best practice is identified and shared, and the listening stage of this programme is so important. It's going to be extensive and will involve innovative community outreach and an in-depth consultation with experts, local authorities, stakeholders, women's groups and all of the capital's communities. And as part of this listening stage, I welcome the Assembly members to feed in their views. You will have expertise and know your communities. The Secretariat team is being put together now, and they'll welcome input from all members, as well as looking closely at the Police and Crime Committee's Preventing Extremism in London 2015 report.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor, and it's welcome news. But and to some extent, you've partly answered a couple of supplementary questions that I did have. How will you ensure, and bearing in mind lessons that learned from the Prevent experience, that the campaign actually is positive, and also give some examples of the work that you see this money being spent on? I mean, there are three core objects which you already outlined. But as I say, much more importantly, and bearing in mind some of the lessons from the Prevent agenda, and let me make it very clear that the criticism of Prevent are well documented, but it still remains the only show in town. So it's really that getting that positive message out to Londoners.
No, thank you for your comments, and I know you've done a lot of work around this in your communities as well. It's about empowering individuals and communities to have the confidence to rebut some of the propaganda that these ideologues, these preachers of hate, are propagating. It's about making sure our youngsters have the resilience to reject these messages. Part of it is just having the humility to listen. This is not a police-led project. This is an outreach project where we seek to learn from communities. Often, they're the best advocates for our way of life, and they're the best barriers to spread hatred. We've got to think about counter-propaganda. We've got to make sure we realise that if we don't occupy this space, allow the hate merchants to occupy it, then don't be surprised if a young, naive Londoner is groomed by that message. And I'll just say this, Unmesh, which is taken on board what you've said in the past. The first stage is us listening. And we'll be listening to experts, community groups, women's groups, about what they see are the possible solutions here.
So I will correct in saying, but I mean, of course, you've got to provide the political leadership. We all have to. Councils, the GLA. But so this is a bottoms-up approach.
Look, the reason why we should be alarmed by the case taking place that's reported in the media is here was a man who was teaching young people that a good way of being a good person is to blow up people. I'm not reporting stuff outside of the public domain. And we should worry. That's taking place in London. There are young people being radicalised, being groomed, being indoctrinated, being brainwashed. And that's what we've got to counter that. And that's what we're trying to do. The sum of money we're talking about in the grand scheme of things is quite small, 400,000 for the Secretary and the engagement work, but I'm hoping it leads to councils, assembly members, community groups, civic leaders, faith leaders, families, and others get involved as well.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member Desai. Then the next question is Assembly Member Cooper, biodiversity in the London Plan.
It's my ambition to make London a national park city, and I've put forward a range of actions to help make more than half of London green by 2050. Both my draft environment strategy and transport strategy also commit to the principles of net biodiversity gain. I've proposed in my new draft London Plan that new developments which create new or improved habitats that result in positive gains for biodiversity will be considered positively as part of the planning process. There's also a new urban greening factor policy which aims to maximise green cover in new developments, from new green roofs to more trees. This will provide greater opportunities to increase biodiversity, along with green features that promote healthier living, lessen the impacts of climate change, improve air and water quality, and encourage water and cycling. My new draft of the plan also includes policies to protect the green belt and sites important for wildlife, and I'll continue to work with boroughs to ensure transport schemes, wherever practicable, protect existing and provide new green infrastructure, delivering a net positive impact on biodiversity.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I was very pleased to see the urban greening factor included as something that we're going to move forward with. And my question was quite specifically also asking about targets, so perhaps you could come back on that. But I wanted to ask you a couple of other specific things as well in relation to biodiversity. One is about the green belt, and we do hear a lot of people saying, oh, lots of bits of the green belt aren't of good quality. Is there any chance that you might consider establishing a small fund? You were talking about another fund that you've just launched today, to improve biodiversity in some of the bits of the green belt that are deficient?
Well, firstly, some of the green belt is deficient. and we shouldn't be embarrassed as those who like the Greenbelt say that openly. The short answer is the Greener City Fund includes funding for projects to improve publicly accessible sites in the Greenbelt. And my Green Capital grants are open at the moment for applications with up to £2 million available to improve green spaces. And I've also budgeted £1.5 million for new woodland creation in the Greenbelt. And again, just a signpost, the government's land management scheme also provides financial incentives for land managers to conserve and restore wildlife habitats in the Greenbelt, and I'll continue to lobby the government post-Brexit to make sure we preserve, protect and enhance the green space we have.
That's good to hear. Can I just also ask you about the work with the boroughs? In the draft London plan, in G1, it talks about green infrastructure, which is obviously incredibly important, and that's why it's in both the environment strategy and the transport strategy, as well as the London plan, that boroughs should prepare green infrastructure strategies, and it runs through a list of all the things that should cover. It doesn't specifically talk about biodiversity action plans, and coming back to the principle around making sure that we have targets, I'm very keen for the boroughs to continue to have targets as well. Perhaps they will automatically set them, but I quite like the word biodiversity action plan to be included within G1. Is that a possibility that we could include that in the final version of the London plan?
Let's look into that.
Thank you very much.
Obviously, it's a draft plan. It's without prejudice to the other responses received, but it's a good point you make.
And another issue, policy H2, which is in reference to small sites. Now, obviously there will be occasions when there is a need to look at offsetting in the sense of providing biodiversity elsewhere. But in the response from the Labour group to the London plan, we're very keen, as we know you are, to see the net increase in biodiversity across the city. But individual applications is where it's going to really hit. So in the small sites, would we see a presumption that offsetting is very much going to be seen as a last resort?
Yeah, absolutely. And the draft plan, I think, makes that clear. That's in those rare cases where you can't do it on the site, you can consider off-site, but it should be rare.
And finally, the other thing is about searches of the London Environment Records Centre, or GIGGLE as it's known to its friends. Of 88,000 planning applications in 2013, there were only 650 GIGGLE searches. Can we start to require developers to do an environmental impact assessment that includes baselining by looking at GIGGLE and then updating it as well after they finish working on sites? Because that's a great way of ensuring that we get the net biodiversity gain.
Well, my understanding is that some developers undertake their own biodiversity assessments outside of the London Environment Records Centre, which may account for the disparity. I agree that planning should be well informed with good evidence, and I want developers to access the biodiversity data. In the draft environment strategy, I've committed to work with partners, including the London Local Environmental Records Centre, to update the London list of priority species and to develop new approaches to London-wide monitoring. So what I also plan to do is to use my London Environment Strategy, as well as the update to the All London Green Grid supplementary planning guidance, to signpost boroughs and others to the service that the Local Environmental Records Centre can provide. And I'll reiterate the need to use biodiversity data and other sources when it comes to making informed planning decisions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we've got 3 questions left. Will you agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in order that we can get the answers to those questions? Yes, agreed. Thank you. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Gavron, London Plan and Community Involvement.
It's great to hear your support for community involvement. For too long, Londoners have seen their city grow in ways that have left many people feeling excluded. My vision for good growth takes a new approach, bringing forward more genuinely affordable homes to buy and rent, delivering a socially integrated city, and giving more people more of a say in how their neighbourhoods change. We have big challenges ahead, including providing the homes and jobs for Londoners' growing population. For many parts of London, that will mean that places develop, bringing housing into our town centres, or providing new jobs and homes in opportunity areas. People rightly want to know how their neighbourhoods are going to change and to be involved in those decisions. My draft London plan sets out an expectation that opportunity area planning framework should be prepared in a collaborative way with local communities. My new draft London plan also identifies that many opportunity areas and town centres overlap with strategic areas of regeneration, and there needs to be collaboration with local communities as well. I've been advised that having additional planning frameworks to cover strategic areas for regeneration would duplicate these other documents, creating consultation fatigue, where people get fed up with too much box ticking and not enough real delivery. Instead, my new draft and the plan prioritises the genuine involvement of local communities, helping them have a stake in the future of their neighbourhoods.
Thank you for that answer. I think we're on the same page. And in your chapter on good growth, you have a policy which says that people should be engaged at the very earliest opportunity in planning their areas, and that they should be able to express their needs and be able also to, well, the boroughs and yourselves, to take advantage of their experience and knowledge. And this is all great. Now, nowhere is this more important in areas of regeneration. These are, and there are strategic areas of regeneration, these are the most distressed and multiply deprived, with huge challenges for communities. And unless they have not just a voice, but a strong proactive role, I think they will not have any control, and we know they don't, over decisions which affect their lives. So that it's really important, because they're so under-resourced, that they are resourced. And I absolutely, there's an anomaly, because you've got this really, really good, strong policy for areas of opportunity areas. But that's not, and there you say, you're really going to help them. You're going to provide leadership and support in them having collaborative planning and preparation and implementation help. And this isn't reflected, and I think it's puzzling that it's not reflected in your strategic areas of regeneration. Now, I've heard what you said, that some of these overlap with opportunity areas, and others are, it's down to the boroughs. But these are strategic areas of regeneration, and you've got a map saying that. And therefore it begs the question, don't you have a strategic role in this? And I would want you to take this away if you can, and consider it with your team, because I don't think that the boroughs alone, even with all the other stakeholders, and without your support, are really going to be able to give that control over decisions which affect their lives that communities really need.
I mean, just to
So if you
reassure
just take it away in advance
Sure.
of the EIP, maybe, and consider this, and would you?
Well, yes, it's a draft plan, so we always listen, especially to experienced colleagues. But just to reassure you in two ways. The draft of the plan sets out an expectation that opportunity area planning frameworks should be prepared in a collaborative way with local communities and stakeholders, and that boroughs should produce strategies for their town centres that are inclusive and representative of the community. And the final thing I'd say is this: I want Londoners to be active citizens. You know as well as I do, there are some parts of our city where people aren't as articulate, don't get as involved. So we're funding 5 citizen-led engagement programmes that focus on engaging groups that don't usually have a voice in making decisions. And this is a good model, I think, of involving communities, particularly in the areas that we're talking about, who are, up until now haven't really got involved in the process of making decisions about their community. But I'm always happy to listen to ideas you have, and I will take away what you've said is a genuine consultation.
Well, that's good. I'm just trying to say, I think you need to resource and support, and there needs to be a strategic role in these areas which are amongst the most 20 deprived areas in the country. The most deprived, the most under-resourced. And I think it will need your help in that. Thank you, if you consider that.
Next question is from Assembly Member Duval in the name of the question.
Yes, we have.
Oh, yes, you
We
have.
did
Thank you. Assembly Member Shaw.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Mayor, how does the draft plan recognise priorities and concerns of Outer London boroughs which are facing unprecedented level of development?
So, a couple of things. Firstly, so the strategic housing market assessment, which we produced, used the same methodology as used by the previous mayor. And that set out a number of targets that is, experts say councils should be meeting in relation to meeting the needs of their constituents in relation to the homes that we need. So each borough knows what the needs are for their area. And we're doing everything we can to help them in relation to funding for genuinely affordable homes. And local authorities need to work with their communities and develop ways in which they can meet the needs for housing in their communities, collaborating, as Senator Gavron said, consulting residents. I would predict that in town centres, in areas near good public transport hubs, you'll see good quality, high density homes more in the future than there have been in the past.
I hear what you say, but with no limits on high densities, how will your draft plan control Outer London skyline to protect both local heritage as well as suburban character, which local communities cherish?
Well, the key thing in these developments is have good design, and a good design will take into account the context, the scale, what's the area like, and it's important for locally elected councillors, after advice from officers, to take on board good quality design. Sometimes you can get a good quality design which is high density. Some of the highest density homes can be found in KNC, can be found in the Olympic Village. Good quality high density homes, but they take into account the context and the surrounding areas. And I'd hope with good design we can meet the needs of our population for increased housing, but also take on board your concerns about heritage and the character of an outer London borough.
There are widespread concerns, and I share those, that your mix of unit sizes in our draft plan is not well balanced and will damage, in my view, outer London areas where there is current shortage of family-sized dwellings. Can you look into this? This has come up time and again in the Assembly and in other areas.
One of the biggest issues raised is the fact that family homes in London are not affordable to most Londoners. And we've got to make sure we realise that the need in London is for affordable family homes, but also for smaller homes for those grown-up children, often with a partner, still living with mum and dad into their late 20s and early 30s. What they want is affordable smaller homes, which they can move into, which frees it up. But it is a fact demonstrated by the English Housing Survey that only a third of family-sized homes in London have couples with children living there. The remaining two-thirds don't have children in those homes. Now, we know from the evidence from the bedroom tax that people don't downsize voluntarily for a variety of reasons. What we need to do is build affordable homes that are attractive for adult children to move into, but also affordable homes that are used by people who can afford them rather than used as an investment to then let to single adults who pay rent.
I'm not quite absolutely convinced about this. When you look at borough local plan policies, etc., you would find that certainly outer London boroughs are still asking for, through their policies, for greater provision of family-sized dwellings, of which there is acute shortage. And therefore, that balance does need to be such that they will have greater proportion of family-sized dwellings in appropriate areas. And that is something I would see London plan to actually promote and support.
It does. It promotes affordable family-sized homes rather than market ones which most Londoners can't afford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Duval.
Answer to Nicky Gavron. I just think, and we welcome the answer you gave of taking it aside and looking again, but in your response, I think some of the groups that you want to participate are going to be at a disadvantage. And whilst I'm a great supporter of local government institution, it's not one of its great qualities of transparency and interaction with people in terms of planning issues and explaining where they go along. And the disadvantage is that some of your areas that you've said that will have resources are not all the strategic areas that you've indicated in the London plan. So unless there is someone who supports and resources people to have an equal conversation with those in local government to be able to contribute to these plans, they're always going to be on the back foot. And I know there are political decisions to be made at local level, but it causes great dissatisfaction about some of these exchanges go on, even in where community groups are articulate. So those groups that you're saying you want to be involved in, you want to encourage participation, aren't going to do it. Secondly, it's really going back to, and I want you to maybe not give the answer now, but that strategic role and arbitration of some of these issues when there is conflict between the bureaucracy, in a friendly way I say that word, not in a bad way, and local communities' desires and aspirations. And it's those issues about reducing conflicts. And I think what my colleague Nicky Gavron was saying, that you have a strategic role in that. I would like you to give you that, if you could give that some consideration. It's difficult, but we think would reduce further conflicts within our communities over some of these big issues and what's happening in communities, and particularly in outer London areas. It could be, I've got issues going on in Greenwich that you're fully aware about, of some of those issues and aspirations of local communities meeting in terms of where the bureaucracy stands at local level.
Let me answer that question in three parts. Firstly, as far as the draft policies we have, they've had the widest consultation and most engagement than any mayor's previously had. It's meaningful, and we are listening. So just to reassure you in relation to the policies they've been widely consulted on. Secondly, a good local authority with good councillors will properly consult their constituents when it comes to making a decision on a particular application. And we need to encourage local authorities to do that, but also when it comes to them devising local plans. But to assist Londoners becoming better citizens, we've got a programme which is delivering 5 community-based engagement pilot projects to build relationships and develop civic leadership in communities that currently don't have a voice in City Hall. And it's been resourced through some commissioning funds, £80,000, training 50 community project coordinators and engaging 400 participants. And I'll give you an example of some of the people that you and I both want to make sure they're more involved. Some of the successful bids: Age UK East London to work with older BAME Londoners, the London Bulgarian Association to explore how they can get more involved. We're working with young black men in Lambeth to get them more involved in decision making. Somali communities in East London to get them more involved. UPress working with BAME and Somali communities in West London. So
Thank you, Mayor.
It's really important that for you to be reassured. I take this issue very, very seriously, and any ideas gratefully received.
Thank you.
We need more.
Let's now move to the next question in the name of Assembly Member Berry. Estate regeneration guidance.
Thank you, Chair. Estate regeneration can, when done well, bring genuine benefits to Londoners. It can offer existing tenants and leaseholders better homes, see more homes of all tenures built, and deliver improvements to the local neighbourhood. But alongside these potential benefits, we know estate regeneration can often involve disruption and change to established communities, sometimes over several years, and can result in disagreement between residents and their landlords. It can also lead to residents not being properly consulted, a loss of social housing, and a bad deal for displaced tenants and leaseholders. Although my powers to get involved in estate regeneration schemes are limited, I decided to publish a draft good practice guide to estate regeneration, setting out principles for successful schemes. This is the first time any mayor has published such a guide, and I wanted to ensure the draft was consulted on extensively and widely with members of the public. The draft sets out my key principles of estate regeneration, including there must be no loss of social housing, alongside rights to return for social tenants and a fair deal for leaseholders. Crucially, there must be resident support for proposals based on full and transparent consultation. I wanted feedback from Londoners to help steer the final version of this guide, and so as well as receiving responses sent directly to us, I made sure the consultation process for the draft version was far more proactive and extensive than the norm under previous mayors. My team further met with a wide range of people and groups, including my Deputy Mayor of Housing, who has met with Assembly members, including Assembly Member Berry and Assembly Member Copley, to take on board their detailed points. We'll also consider points raised by the Housing Committee and by the Assembly in their motion in December. We're considering all of this feedback as we shape the final version of my guide. This final version will set up my plans to ensure residents have a say on plans for their estate, as well as referencing the tough new policies I've introduced in my draft London plan to protect social housing. These new policies make clear that any existing housing based on social rent levels demolished through regeneration must be replaced on a like-for-like basis, and they are already having an effect, as you can see with my decision to block plans for Graham Park in Barnet. These plans would have seen the loss of 257 homes at social rent levels, which I made clear was completely unacceptable. The first time that plans for estate regeneration have been blocked by a Mayor of London on this basis. I'll be publishing the final version of my guide, and alongside my policy on protecting social housing, it will be absolutely clear residents must always be at the heart of what happens on their estate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, I work a lot with estate residents. There are a lot of them around London at the moment facing regeneration plans. And along with us in the Assembly, they are all waiting for quite anxiously and a bit impatiently now for the final guidance. The consultation closed in March last year. We know a lot of feedback came in to that initial consultation. And then we were told, I think rightly, after the disaster at Grenfell Tower, that more responses had come in, and therefore those needed to be considered as well before you release the final guidance. However, I mean, after the, even after that, I was told that it would still come out at the end of the summer, and we're now in January. The Assembly passed a motion in December asking you to recommend that ballots are always used on schemes. And so I want to know more about the consultation feedback that you received. I asked for it in a Freedom of Information request in May, and I was told because it was going to come out soon, you weren't going to release the consultation responses. But we do want to know what you've received. So can you first of all tell us how many responses you've now had and how many more of them came in after the Grenfell Tower disaster?
Well, just to complete the story, it's worth reminding ourselves that it was a combination of the general election and PERDA, Grenfell Tower. The fact that officers were involved in drafting a draft housing strategy and a draft on the plan, and a variety of other reasons why there's been more of a delay than I would have liked.
I haven't much time, so if you have those numbers, that would be... Yeah,
well, when we publish the draft estate regeneration guidance, we'll also publish the consultation responses. The numbers I have to hand are, there have been, I do have the numbers in my briefing.
Chair,
there have been over 2,000 responses to the draft good practice guide consultation. Over 2,000, just over 2,000 responses.
And that was up to March, or in total?
That was up to March.
And how many more came in after the Grenfell Tower disaster?
I've not got those figures with me, but when we publish the good practice, we'll also publish the summary as well. We should have that in there.
Okay, I mean, I'm a bit disappointed because we have discussed the delay before. We've been told about the extra responses after Grenfell. I would have hoped you'd have brought that number with you today.
Well, I'm not
if you will give it me later, that would be good. And I think that might be all my time.
Thank you. Members, that brings us to the end of the meeting. I'd like to thank the Mayor for his answers. Thank you. And going on to Part B, can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked. Thank you. Section 6, the next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 25th January 2018. This meeting will principally be used to scrutinise and consider the Mayor's draft consolidation budget for 2018-19. Just to remind members, that's a day-long meeting. And item number 7, I don't have any other business except to remind members that there is an IFA briefing immediately following my banging this gong in Committee Room 1. Gavel even.
GLA, Chamber, Sound.